What is a hero? A mythological figure, often of divine descent, endowed with great strength or ability? An illustrious warrior? No. It's a person admired for achievements and noble qualities, one who shows great courage. Welcome to the What's a Hero podcast, where we dive deep into what a hero is and what makes them that hero. I'm your host, Ken Fraunfelter, and I'm going to be introducing you to some of the world's most likely and unlikely heroes. You may have never heard of them before, and they most likely have never met you. But they all have one thing in common. They are ready to do whatever it takes to help make you better, even if it means sacrificing everything for you. Let's get into it.
This is episode 48 of the What's a Hero podcast with me, Ken Fraunfelter. Now, you look at the way the world goes today, and we think about all of the stuff that we deal with. There was, back in the 80s, we had the war on crime, or the war on drugs. Remember Nancy Reagan, we talked about her thing, and just say no. We did all these different things where, as I grew up, I just remember everybody just saying, just say no. And then when you actually started seeing kids smoking pot or doing whatever in school, you thought, wow, I guess it is real, because I lived in an area that wasn't so pervasive with that. Nevertheless, as you grow up and you start seeing more and more things, you start seeing people, they've got cocaine, they're doing meth or whatever, and you say, well, kids are doing that. Yes, kids are doing that. Kids are doing it more now than they were back then in school and whatnot. But if they did do it, it was at their house, Nevertheless, I didn't see it as much as I know other people did. And, we look at it now, and there's certain states that are legalizing not just marijuana, which a ton of states have done that, but there's other drugs, meth, cocaine, heroin. We're boiling it down to fentanyl, and then there's even more stuff that's even more, potent than fentanyl. And as you start looking at these things, you start wondering, why do people go through this? Why do people go and get into drugs and do the things that they do? There's such an addiction to it that it really eats at the heart of humanity. And the thing is that some people just cannot fight that. They cannot combat that ability, that addiction, that need for just that little taste of whatever drug they're on, because that stuff is so potent. If I can get the word out. But it is so potent, and you got to figure out, where does this come from? A couple different things it comes from, where the person comes from and how they've grown up, what they've seen in their life, what they've been introduced to. But then the drugs itself, where do those come from? How are those introduced into these people's lives? And as you start seeing more and more people dying because of the legalization of various drugs and stuff like that, you don't even think about, how this absolutely destroys families and how it absolutely destroys, lives that would otherwise have no issue had that drug not been there. And now we start looking into, okay, how do we combat that? Like I said, in the 80s, we would look at the different ways in which we would say no to drugs. There would be the war on drugs and stuff. And then there would be all these other things that we've been fighting forever. And they figure, oh, we just lost the war on drugs, so what we're going to do is we're just going to start legalizing things. And as we try to figure out what to do with this stuff, there are people that have actually combated is combated a word? I guess combated is a word. Anyways, they have dealt with these things, and not so much on the level of what the drug is or what the problem is, but they start dealing with it more they get in more of the minutia of it. Where does it come from? And then where does that thing come from? And you can go into what's called precursor substances, these little things that get into it. And today we're going to talk about that in kind of a grander scale than I ever even considered talking about it or having a conversation about this, because there's more to it, that if you can take away little things, you can start taking away the big things. And I always talk about, if you can handle or deal with little things, small things in your life, small problems that come along or whatever, you can deal with these big things that come along in your life. Because the big things will never come along because you dealt with the small things ahead of time. But today's guest is just one of those kind of people who knows how to deal with the minutia, so it deals with the big things. So the big things don't become big things. They don't even become issues. And a lot of times we have to deal with all these other things that are involved, whether it's politics or red tape or whatever the case is. But for the most part, today's guest knows how to start working towards different angles and how to get into, like I said, the minutia of things to help deal with them. And as you know, on the show, we talk to heroes, and we talk to the people who have done so many different things in their life that they have become the hero that they always longed for, but they didn't realize that they were that hero. And it makes a huge difference when you start meeting and talking to these people and finding out where they come from and who they are and what it is they do and why they do it. And today's guest is one of those people. They spent 30 years in the DEA, had a time in his life where he just had to adapt and become other people and become how to fit into civilizations and cultures and stuff that just were not his norm. And with that, developed such a sense of knowledge of and ability to become, somebody that people can trust and know, and has in fact been a hero more times than he can count, and yet he probably doesn't even consider himself a hero. Nevertheless, I am pleased to have Mr. Michael W. Brown on the podcast today, a former DEA agent and a plethora of other wonderful things, I'm assuming. How you doing, Michael?
Hey, Ken, good evening, or good afternoon, I should say. Thank you for the warm introduction.
Absolutely. We're on a little bit of different time zone, so if you hear him talk about the evening and hear me talk about the afternoon, well, that's that's what we got. So thanks for coming on. Yeah, absolutely. So 30 years, that's a long time. That's a long time to spend in a single career.
Yeah, actually 31 years. I graduated DEA Academy when I was 24, just a few years after finishing college, and just recently retired last June and started my new career with Rigaku Analytical Devices as the director of counter-narcotics, interdiction, and partnerships.
That's pretty cool. That is a whole bunch of stuff that we can start breaking those down in a little bit as well. But 30 years in the DEA, that means, and you said at 24. So up until that point, you had to live life. You had to do things, because it's not just something that just pops in. So who was little Michael? What did little Michael do that kind of got things going for him?
Right. Well, before DEA, college, University of Cincinnati, Bearcats graduate, degree in administration and urban planning. And I was planning to go to law school at some point in time after graduation. But while I was working through college, I was working as a store security manager, one of the large department stores in Cincinnati called McAlpin's. I believe it's now referred to as Dillard's. And certainly you can appreciate the necessity for store security today.
Sure.
When you look at every state and mob looting and this open theft occurring at an alarming rate.
Right.
So for 4 years, I worked in store security, catching shoplifters, everything from 13-year-olds to 92-year-old women, stealing jewelry, organized crime groups coming in, stealing thousands of dollars in merchandise. And while I was going to school, I really found that work interesting, not just catching shoplifters, but doing the investigations, post-investigations, working with the police, working with the prosecutor's office. I had an opportunity to testify in court many times as a witness against those who were charged with felony crimes, assault and robbery. And I found that it wasn't necessarily law school, but it certainly required a degree of intellect and a degree of physical fitness and ability, and a willing to really step out there and take some risks. And I found that lifestyle extremely attractive. And at that point, I started looking at a career with the Cincinnati Police Department. I had submitted an application. And while going through that process, I met a lot of individuals in law enforcement, police officers, when I was working store security. And I got to know them very well because they would always come to the store and pick up the detainees. One afternoon after making several arrests, one of the officers came by, Cincinnati police officer came by, and we were talking. And he worked on a task force for the Drug Enforcement Administration as part of his duties. And at that time, I really didn't have any idea what DEA was, FBI, federal law enforcement. And so he explained to me, he says, he worked on a task force with DEA and other state and local law enforcement officers. and they investigated high-level drug traffickers, right? And again, at that time, I'm thinking drug traffickers. The way I grew up, somebody smokes marijuana, had a few beers. That was the extent of my knowledge.
Right. Yeah.
But I looked into it. DEA. I looked into FBI. Federal investigative agencies. DEA did primarily drug investigations, where FBI did a multitude of various investigative activities. So I went down to the recruiting office for both agencies, and I put applications in. And a couple of weeks went by, and one Sunday afternoon, I was watching 60 Minutes. And 60 Minutes did a special on DEA, DEA operations in Central and South America called SNOCAP. Mm-hmm. SNOCAP was a joint U.S. law enforcement interdiction program, which DEA was working in conjunction with Peruvian, Bolivian, Honduran, and Guatemalan special counter-narcotic forces in an attempt to take the drug war to the source. Right? To go to where drugs are produced and go after the means of production and individuals behind the production of narcotics, while DEA in the United States was going after those involved in the distribution of narcotics. But in order to be in that program, the 60 Minutes, they're interviewing DEA. A guy named Frank White really started that program. And to get into that program, you had to successfully go to and complete Ranger School, with the exception of jump school.
So U.S. Army Ranger School. U.S.
Army Ranger School down at Fort Benning, Georgia. Uh-huh. And they showed the recruitment process, the selection week, and the training. And I tell you, looking back on that today, I would say it's very, very close to the level of what Rangers go through today, with the exception of, desert phase, jump, and some other aspects.
Right.
But, and I said to myself, looking at DEA agents fast roping out of old Vietnam UH-1 helicopters with Bolivian counterparts in triple canopy jungle, and blowing up drug labs and going after traffickers in triple canopy jungle down in the Amazon basin. I said, that looks a little more exciting than 3 more years of law school. And so made the decision that, I definitely have to go federal. I would go FBI if they called me first, but I was hoping DEA would call me. And that next Monday, after watching the 60 Minutes episode, DEA called and said that someone had dropped out of the academy and they had an open slot. But if I wanted to go, I had a week to go. And without hesitating, I said yes. Send me the information, and I'll be at the academy, bright and early in 2 weeks.
Let me clear my schedule. Let me clear my schedule. I'm on my way.
Exactly.
That's pretty cool. So is that, you said that's not something that you necessarily thought about growing up. And what did you do growing up? Were you just regular kid? I mean, were your parents in the military or in the law enforcement or anything? Or?
Well, looking back, I was born in Philadelphia, 1964, quite some time ago. My father was an engineering draftsman for a company called Merle National Drug Pharmaceutical Company. My mother was a teacher, master's graduate in the sciences, mathematics, and chemistry. Somewhere along 1974, 75, my father got transferred to Cincinnati, Ohio. And so we moved from Philadelphia to the suburb. When my father was transferred to Cincinnati, Ohio, we bought a house in Montgomery Township, and it was a brand new house, $77,000. As you can imagine, that was a very expensive house at that time. But I'd love to find a house today for $77,000.
Yes, yeah.
But what was interesting about that? Being an African American, we were the only black family in that part of Cincinnati. It was very affluent. And, so I went to St. Ignatius grade school, and I was the only black student in that school. So, right at that point, I found myself in a different environment than what I was in Cincinnati or in Philadelphia, which was a multiracial neighborhood to almost exclusively all white, upper middle class white neighborhood. So, went to a Catholic school, wasn't necessarily Catholic, but went to a Catholic school because my mother thought that was the best place for a good education. And went through that whole process. But at that time in 1977, 76, no one was really talking about, cocaine, methamphetamines, in that social group. The most you would hear about is maybe someone was smoking marijuana, or they were drinking their dad's beer, to party, and that's all you would see. Right. Unlike what kids today are faced with, right? Today, 13, 14-year-olds tell you all about cocaine, methamphetamine. A lot of them are involved in drug trafficking and drug usage. So times have definitely changed in the last 30 years since, I was a kid. going to school and the challenges that I faced socially as a young adult or a teenager, into young adulthood, compared to what kids and young adults are facing today.
Mm-hmm. Now, were you in middle school and high school? Did you play sports? Were you busy doing stuff, or did you like to sit inside and watch TV all day?
No, at that time nobody was sitting inside. We were all
right.
outside from dusk till dawn. There's that old saying your parents used to say, "Don't let the street lights catch you outside."
That's right.
And I was always getting in the house seconds before that light went off. But all through middle school, I played some baseball. And unfortunately, when I was 11, my dad passed away through some health issues, and my mother took on responsibility for myself and my sister. But so then in high school, I went into the wrestling and tried to play a little football, but I was small for my age. 16, 17 years old. I was 5'7", 5'8", but I was maybe 120 pounds, right? And all the kids I was playing with were significantly larger,
right?
And I did run track for the whole 4 years and was pretty good in the relay and the 100. And funny story, when I went to University of Cincinnati, I tried out for the track team, and I'm lined up on the line with other first year freshmen, and these guys all look like linebackers, right?
Right.
5'9", 5'8", they're 170, 180 pounds, and they're just all muscle. And the whistle goes off, and of course, I come in last, dead last. And coach comes up to me and says, "Hey, I really appreciate you coming out, but I don't think this is going to be the sport for you." So at that time, I realized I was not going to have an athletic career, and said to myself, if I'm going to make it, it's going to have to be academics. It's going to have to be the books. And this is where I'm going to have to focus on.
That's right. Yeah.
I was pretty good at design. My father was a surrealist artist. Back in the 50s, he did a lot of surrealism for his company, Monroe National. And so I went into design, art, and architecture and urban planning, right? The administrative aspect. And then I was planning to go to law school to be a city solicitor. That was the career track I had set for myself, and pretty much stuck to it, until I got into the store security. And then 4 years of doing that, it kind of altered my path away from law and administration into law enforcement administration.
Right. Yeah, you think about that the track story. I'm 5'6". I'm not very tall at all, but I'm gonna quantify that. I'm tall enough for whatever it is I need to do. Anyways, but I sprinted in. I was on the track team, and I sprinted in school. I'm a little bit I don't know, stockier, so I had no problem with that. But I would get on the line with these guys who were long, lanky, and they were sprinters too. And then we would go, and I, for whatever, had some wheels on me, and I was able to, I did pretty well, went to state a couple times and all that stuff like that in track.
Great.
But I remember one time specifically, we were low on points at a track meet, and my coach says, we need another, maybe gain some points on the hurdles, because we didn't have enough hurdlers. And so I said, "Oh, I'll do it. I'll try it." He goes, "Okay." So he puts me in. Never done hurdles before. I'd seen the guys do them, but I hadn't done them before. Well, we get them. It was like the 200 hurdles, I think it was. And I go and I run, and there's a whole bunch of other people who were there. Their form was perfect going over the hurdles, one leg's back, one leg's forward, and they're just boom, boom, boom. And I would go, and what I would do is I would sprint to the hurdle, stop, hop over the thing, sprint to the next one, stop, hop. And that's the way I did it. And by the time we get to the straightaway at the end, I'm looking back and I'm ahead of everybody. And I'm like, and I hear people laughing in the stands, but just because it was so unorthodox, my style. But I won that one, and I'd never hurdled before. But these people, they were hurdlers, and I got some points for our team.
Right.
But it's just kind of funny. You can be unorthodox, you can be different, and you can still do well. And I've not hurdled since, and I've tried to do it to the point where, how would they do it to where it's smooth? And there's no way I could do it. I'm shorter than the hurdles itself. And so I had, but that was just my thing. And I thought it was just funny that, you talk about that, but you never know. You never know what you can do. And I definitely wasn't going to the Olympics in hurdles or sprinting or anything like that, but it was enough to get me to realize, okay, you can do more than you may give yourself credit for. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to really step out there. My father always used to tell me, he said, failing is actually good because it tells you what you can't do and what you need to improve on, right? Mm-hmm. So if you never fail, you never know what your strengths or what your weaknesses are. And in track, I said, okay, I can run, but this is really not going to be my sport. So let's try something else. Let's look at the academic side, take another path. And I think that was a great decision it led me to a fantastic career with DEA. 33 years. I've traveled the world. I've worked in many countries. I've advised ambassadors and presidents and prosecutors and worked in various legal capacities. So it's just been an outstanding career track just by taking that chance on something different, something unknown.
Yeah.
Right. And then stepping out there on a little bit of faith, a little bit of courage, and applying yourself.
Yeah. You talk about that unknown. So you're going, well, you'd go back to your story where you're talking about you went to the academy within a week's time of knowing you're going to go. How was that? Did you have prep? Did you have knowledge of what you were to expect, or was it just I'm going in blind and I'm gonna see what happens when I get there?
Talking to the recruiter, my country, the RAC Special Agent in charge of Cincinnati DEA office, Herb Warren, phenomenal individual, mm-hmm. who recruited me and hired me. And he says, look, pack some clothes and bring a lot of attitude and determination because it's going to be a tough academy. Uh-huh. Academics, physical fitness, and it's going to be strict and it's going to be something like you've never seen before. And, I had a really good life. I was living with my mom, my sister, job was going well, potential to law school or join the Cincinnati Police Department. It was all laid out. No risk, right? No chance of failure. It's what we call the blue pill, right?
Right.
Life is good.
Right.
But that red pill was looking really tempting. Mm-hmm. And the unknown, the challenge, and what I had gotten from working in store security really had piqued an interest that I never even knew I had. And I took the red pill, swallowed it, and went to that academy. And let me tell you, it was every bit as challenging as my recruiter, Herb Warren, told me, to almost like a master's course in academics. And then, of course, physical fitness. I've never shot a gun before. Here you go. Here's your 6-hour 9mm. And you've got a couple of weeks to pass this course or you're out if you don't score 94 or above. Right. Here's the run. You've got so many minutes to finish this run. Here's the swim. Everything's pass fail. You don't pass, you don't move forward. You go home. Mm-hmm. And, we lost several people in that academy class who were smart, who were in great shape. But then the discipline, people couldn't get used to having somebody in your face, telling you what to do, when to get up. And that sort of thing, people hit the bell. They're like, hey, this isn't for me.
Was it kind of boot camp-ish? Was it?
DEA was very, we were at the FBI Academy at that time. DEA did not have its own academy, so we shared space with the FBI. And everybody in DEA was wearing black army pants, black jump boots, and a black shirt that said DEA on it. And I still think they're wearing that today, which is funny. In comparison to the FBI students, they had on brown khakis, blue polo shirt with the FBI on it, and a sweater tied around their neck.
So, the frat boys.
The frat boy, we kind of went back and forth. I mean, they were great partners to work with. We always teased each other. They called us the knuckle draggers, and we called them, the frat boys.
Right.
But no, it was strict. DEA. I mean, your counselors were seasoned veteran special agents who were selected to come down for the 3-month academy training, and you were watched 24/7. And there was absolutely no leeway for nonsense, joking around. It was business, serious business, 24/7.
Right. So the guys that left, that got dropped out or whatever, it wasn't because they were messing around or they went out on the town getting drunk or something like that. It was because of the class itself. It was too difficult. They didn't pass a course or they didn't.
I would say more so to 3 or 4 individuals. These were all, everybody in class was a professional. I was probably the youngest individual in that class and had no formal professional experience. But we had guys who were police officers for 10 years. We had guys from other agencies. We had professionals. We had individuals with master's degrees. And it was generally the individuals who seemed to have the highest level of education and sense of independence had the difficult time, obeying and going with, hey, get up at 4:00 in the morning and give me another 5 push-ups and that sort of thing. Or people on the gun range who couldn't master, handling the weapon, just couldn't get your score up. So, out of the class, I think it was maybe 40 people passed, but we only lost a handful, I think, which was a pretty good success rate.
That's pretty good. That's pretty cool. And like you said, you never thought of yourself as being exceptional in one thing or another, and so you just get in there and smooth sailing, I'm guessing, right? There was no...
Yeah, I was always that kind of guy who was never the best guy in class, never the worst guy, but I kind of floated somewhere around the upper echelon, upper top of that, maybe coming in third or fourth, but never coming in last, and sometimes coming in first, but not all the time.
Right.
But I think I have an ability, my strongest ability attribute, I would say, with DEA is my ability to adapt, to take on various personalities within the job to meet certain job requirements. I used to do a lot of undercover, posing as a drug trafficker or drug buyer.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because a lot of the individuals I worked with in DEA would always use kind of the Serpico undercover persona, the jeans and the army jacket,
right,
buying, a couple ounces. Me and my partner, a guy I used to work with he'd been with DEA for a number of years. We were suit and tie. We were clean, right? So we'd roll up into to buy a kilo, and first thing the drug trafficker would look at me and African American or white, and says, you don't sound like a drug trafficker. And I said, I'm not. I went to Ivy League school. I live in the best part of the neighborhoods, and I'm here to make some money. So we're going to do some business, or we're going to talk all day. And he was down with that. It's all about how you carry yourself on the street.
Right.
You don't have to look like a drug addict to buy drugs. And those aren't the kind of guys we were going after. We're going after higher level individuals. Mm-hmm. So, my partner and I, we developed this higher level persona. He was in real estate, and I worked in the universities, and I had access to students and people with money. And that's what drug traffickers want. They want people with money,
right,
who represent low risk. So we were very successful and did a number of very high level drug investigations for the 10 years that I was based in Detroit, Michigan.
That's pretty cool. So you get out of the academy, you had then go to Ranger School at that point, right? Yeah.
Well, what's interesting, I got out of the academy. I'm a GS7, the DEA Department of Justice, GS7, 9, 10, 9, 11, 12, 13 would be a senior agent after about 5 years. So I came out as a GS7 with really no experience. Within a couple of months, I applied for the Operation Snowcap. They were looking for recruits. Mm-hmm. And my group supervisor at the time was like, you shouldn't go. You didn't go to DEA to become a ranger and to fight in the jungles. You stay here and build your investigative skills. But one of the primary reasons I joined DEA was to fast up out of that helicopter and go to Ranger School. And there was nobody going to talk me out of that. So I joined and I got accepted. And the way the program worked, we went down to the assessment week at Fort Benning. Those who passed came back and did the 3.5-4 month training program. And then you went to Spanish language training school, right? So the whole process took about a year. So I'm out of the office for about a year going through all this process. And I come back to the office. And my GS, he's upset with me. He's like, you missed out on a lot. Just fill in when you can, do some surveillance, do some undercover, and help out. Well, after a couple of months of doing that, Snowcap called and says, okay, your first deployment. It's going to be down in Bolivia. It's a 3-month deployment. So you go down for 3 months, you come back for 3 months, and then you redeploy for 3 months. So in a year, I would do 2 deployments. I did a total of 4 deployments over about a 3 to 4 year period, Honduras, Guatemala, and Bolivia. And then the program in 1996, 97 was shut down due to, political issues, funding issues, and the war on drugs changed and assets were brought back to the United States to concentrate on the crack cocaine epidemic and increased distribution throughout the United States.
Right. And so this was the time that you were wearing the suit where you were doing the undercover stuff when you were down in Bolivia or down South America, or was that up here in the States?
Down South America, it was fatigues, M4, living in the jungle. Then I go back to Detroit and, suit and tie in the office, and then working undercover with my partner, working by myself, suit and tie, sports jacket, casual attire, going out, meeting mid-level drug traffickers in restaurants and parking lots, and talking the business and moving forward. But interesting enough, I was always challenged on my appearance. People would say, well, you can't buy drugs in a suit. And I go, well, it just depends on how much you're trying to buy and who you're trying to represent yourself as. All right.
Yeah.
And if you're coming at, I found if you're coming at a trafficker, someone who looks like he understands what he's doing and can't be fooled, that puts you in a safer position and gives you more authority empowered to operate and maybe control that scenario.
Right.
As opposed to presenting yourself as somebody the trafficker may see as less than them and then can manipulate you in a particular situation.
Right. I guess it's that whole idea is act like you've done this before. It's that whole
exactly
that mindset.
And that you're someone that shouldn't be toyed with. You're not a person to be taken lightly, right? You're a person who understands what this business is all about, and you're a person who can defend himself. And I always carried I had a nickel-plated 6-hour 9mm, which I always carried in an appendix holster, and I always made sure that my suit jacket was always open, and that the individual saw that I was carrying, right? But I'd never talk about it. I'd never bring it up. Just one of those things. The guy, you follow his eye traffic, and he's looking, he sees it, and he's listening to you. He's making an assessment right now,
right, of
who this individual is in front of him and what his capabilities are, and if he should, work with him, trust him, try and rip him off, or just give him the respect that he deserves. That way, diffuse as an undercover. You have to diffuse issues before they even become an issue.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine.
Right? And the psychology aspect of that is very important. I will credit the FBI. They have, in order to do undercover for the FBI, you have to actually go to a school where they teach you how to be an undercover. DEA, it's generally people who really have a knack for it, gravitate towards it and do it, and either you're successful or not. But, DEA has been very lucky. We have very high caliber individuals. A high caliber of individuals have joined DEA. They just simply who are innate and have those skill sets. I can't explain it, but I've worked with a lot of individuals who I didn't even realize they were agents if I didn't know it. I mean, some of these individuals could play that role so well.
Really?
Right? With no training whatsoever.
They just know how to be somebody else. And so that's kind of the idea. I mean, you were talking about having to adjust yourself when you were a kid, when you moved to Ohio, right?
Correct, Cincinnati.
Yeah, you had to adjust who you were. Not because of whatever reason, but because you become into a different culture that you have to now assimilate into.
Yeah, I came from Philadelphia in a multiracial culture, neighborhood, grade school, to a upper middle class, all white Catholic environment. I went to St. Ignatius, and then in high school I went to LaSalle, which was an all boys Catholic school, and I think I finished my last 2 years in high school in Coleraine Township, which was a public high school. But that entire neighborhood where I lived in was all white. That St. Ignatius grade school was all white. And so that was a different environment. Number one, I'm in a whole Catholic environment, going to Mass on Wednesday, and I'm integrating and mixing with kids at a very high educational level. The parents at a very high educational level. I think everyone on my street had a pool in their house except for me, and their fathers were doctors and lawyers and whatnot. And I had to unconsciously, I had to find a way to mix in and blend in with and make friends, right? And make that work, and be comfortable at it. And by the time I had graduated, I wasn't even phased. It wasn't like I see them as white and I saw myself as black. I just saw everybody as the same. But that's how comfortable I felt in that environment.
Right.
And I think that has paid its dividends in my adult life. Working with DEA, working in countries like Pakistan and India and the Middle East, where you have to assimilate and adjust very fast if you're going to be successful, in those very extreme cultures.
Right. And so I'm, going back to the undercover stuff, you've got to be able to read somebody really quick. What do they want that I can give them so I can get what I want or what I need? Right. Well,
exactly. I mean, you know what they want. They want money, you want to buy their narcotics. There's a basic understanding. The real thing when you watch people undercover, whether it's TV or real life, it's a chess game. You're looking at individuals. You're trying to figure out, is this someone I can take? Is this someone I can trust? Or is this someone I need to walk away from? And vice versa, individuals selling drugs, because it's a risk, right? It's a risk. You're going to get killed or you're going to get arrested and go to jail for the next 4 years. So risk mitigation is really important, whether you're in the drug business, whether you're a real drug trafficker or you're an undercover agent trying to get next to a drug trafficker.
Right.
It's not Hollywood. It's real life. People die. DEA, unfortunately, over the years, has lost a number of agents who were killed, primarily in undercover capacities or while doing narcotic investigations.
Yeah, that's, and that's got to be hard to hear. Somebody you either went to school with or your friend or whatever you spent holidays with or something like that, and all of a sudden you hear that they went out on on an operation and they're not coming back. And that it's just,
Yeah. It is, it's like I haven't had any real personal friends who were hurt, seriously hurt or killed on the job. But if you're a DEA agent, you're my brother, and you understand that as a Marine. You don't have to know the Marine to love the Marine,
right?
And having gone to Ranger School, I have that same loyalty. I think about when I was on the job. Everett Hatcher was an agent in New York who was gunned down by an Italian mafia associate that he was dealing with, and the guy just walked up to him, shot him in the head, killed him immediately. And that struck us all very hard. But it was a wake up call that you can't get comfortable. That there are people out there who want to kill you, whether they think you're a police officer working undercover, whether they think you're a legitimate drug trafficker, and they just want to kill you.
Yeah.
And so, DEA looked at undercover and instituted new protocols and procedures to keep agents safe. But still, at that critical second, when you were standing next to a bad guy, there is nobody who can get to you in time to save your life except you.
Right.
Right. Because you're seconds away. We're face to face, as close as I am to you on this webcast. That's how close I'm standing talking to a guy who could potentially take my life. Mm-hmm. And to do undercover, you just need a significant amount of, it's not a fearless job. Fear keeps you sharp, but you have to have a high level of confidence and be able to think quick on your feet. More importantly, be able to perception, read as you said, read an individual's body language, listen to everything he's saying, and be aware of your environment around you.
Right. You don't even think about half the times the decisions that we make based off of what the information that we're given. Do I turn left, turn right down a certain aisle at the grocery store because of who's down that aisle, or whatever the case is. And that's a huge distinction to have that knowledge of, to know what to do. And like you said, you look at people, can you take them? Can you do whatever? Because a lot of these people, they speak as well as they speak English. They speak violence just as fluently, and they don't even think about. They have no qualms about using it. There was a story one time of a guy who goes. He moves to a town and he says, I want to open a gym, but I want it to be a good gym. So just regular workout gym. And he goes and talks to the police. A couple police officers. He's like, "Where's the worst part of town, just where the mob goes or where bikers are at or whatever, and they're like, well, it's over there. He goes, okay, you don't want to open your gym over there, do you? He goes, no, I actually do. And he says, well, why? He goes, because those guys are going to be the most respectful to everybody else, because they know that if they're not, there's going to be problems. There's not going to be the lurky guy that's over there trying to watch some a female, do squats or whatever. It's going to be these guys are going to, call somebody, make them accountable, because they're going to be respectful of each other, because they know that if they're not, violence can come their way. And that sounds, hinky or whatever when you think of it like that. But realistically, if you know that somebody may very well hurt you, you're going to step up your game and you're going to be a little bit nicer. You're going to be a little bit more respectful, all that stuff like that. And that sounds like something similar to what you're talking about, is you are respectful because you don't know what he can do. But on the other side, he sees a gun inside your coat or whatever. He's now doesn't know what you can do.
That's interesting. You said I had one case where I was doing, I was buying crack cocaine. I was part of a big task force in Detroit, targeting, and there was an area where the Crips were selling massive amounts of crack cocaine. So I was driving around as an undercover, buying crack cocaine from various individuals, and they would be under surveillance. We identify them, and at some point in time, we'd come back and do a large roundup. So, and interesting enough, my partner, she was a Detroit female officer who was working with me as my partner. And so we were driving around. She looked very young. So the idea was, I was an older college graduate student. She was college freshman, and we were out looking for some crack for a university. So as we were driving through one neighborhood, there was one individual. He saw me talking to some people on the corner who he knew were crack dealers. And then as I drove past him, he looked at me and he said some words and shook his hand in the air, said some things. And I don't know why he was upset, but maybe because, I didn't buy from him or whatever. So drove past him, didn't pay me any attention, went down to the next street. We were sitting waiting for some other people to walk up to a car. So as I look in my rearview mirror, I see this guy coming down the street in his car and jump out 2 car lengths behind me. So I notified the officer with me. I said, hey, we got a problem possible. Just be ready. And I pulled out my SIG, and I had it resting on my left arm right below the open window. Mm-hmm. So this guy comes up, puts his head right in the window and starts to say something, looks down, sees the 9mm looking right at his chest. Mm-hmm. He's like, hey, my bad. I didn't know who you were, but, I'm going to leave you alone. And I said, yeah, that'd be a good idea. And a little bit of advice, don't run up on people that you don't know. And he walked away. He got in his car and left. Uh-huh. But that's one of those situations where you have to be critically aware of your surroundings.
Yeah.
Whatever reason, this guy had a problem with me. He may have had a gun. He may have been trying to hurt me. But when he came up and saw that I had a pistol and I was ready and I wasn't scared, it sent a message. Okay, this is a guy I don't really want to mess with. I'll go back to my car.
Right.
And it was funny that guys in the corner who were selling crack saw that, immediately ran over to the car and gave me congrats and sold me a couple of rocks of crack cocaine.
And you thought
I was the real deal.
And you were able to get
what cop's going to pull a gun out? Right?
Yeah.
So it worked to my advantage, But when you're working in the jungle, you can't go in as a sheep. You have to go in as a wolf, as a lion. You have to go in with someone who looks like he can manage that situation, or at least do some damage, if not.
Right. Yeah, you don't even think about sometimes, and I say this a lot. I say you don't even think about. We live in a world, our lives, our everyday lives, where we go to work, we wake up in the morning, we brush our teeth, we make some breakfast, we head out the door and go to work, hit the grocery store on the way home, maybe hit the gym, whatever, and go home, make dinner, and go to bed after watching TV, and do the same thing the next day. Pick up kids from school, go to soccer games, whatever. There's a whole different subdivision of people who have no qualms about hurting somebody, but they don't care about that stuff. They care about making money. They don't care how they make money. They want to make it, and they're willing to, and if they can keep that money coming, then they're going to do something that's going to have some sustainability, drugs, whatever. At least in their mind, there's sustainability. And we lose that mindset that there are people that are horribly mean, nasty, and they don't care one thing about anybody else other than themselves and maybe the people directly around them. And that seems like the type of people that you're dealing with on a daily basis.
I mean, exactly. I mean, all you have to do is look at the TV today and look at the unprecedented level of violence, right? Whether drug related, gang related, or just general crime, people getting beaten up in the subways. There are some very mean, some very bad people that are walking the streets now, and they feel empowered, mm-hmm. emboldened that nothing's going to happen to them. And there we see the escalation from just a year ago, 2 years ago, to unprecedented levels of violence, especially the targeted assassinations of over 50 police officers in the last year and a half.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about premeditated murder, going out, finding an officer for the specific purpose, of killing an individual. And I get the whole movement. We had the George Floyd situation. We had a really bad police officer who did a very horrific thing. And people are celebrating the murder of police officers because of that one situation, which I think is incredibly unfair. Mm-hmm. And it is not just. Police officers in this country make over 9 million arrests a year. And maybe you have one or two situations where you have a George Floyd situation and you have a really bad officer. Mm-hmm. But by and far, 99.9% of all arrests are done by the book, done legitimately, and individuals, whether black, white, yellow, or red, taken into custody and prosecuted according to the law.
Right.
And this attitude now to defund the police, that the police are the bad guys, that police can be killed without, retaliation or regret, it's the first step on a very slippery slope to complete lawlessness that I'm seeing in New York, that I'm seeing in California, mm-hmm. Baltimore, Detroit, and other cities with an extremely high crime rate and murder rate.
Yeah. It's just fascinating that the misunderstanding that people have of the importance of law enforcement, of police, of just a security person in general. I mean, you look at the lawlessness of, let's say, San Francisco, where somebody goes in and steals, however much worth of merchandise and just walks out past the security guard who doesn't do anything. And that's just a small snippet of the big picture. You might be familiar with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, and he wrote a couple books on killing, on combat. And in one of his books, he on combat, he mentions that there is a point where if society had to wipe clear and had to restart, the first thing that we would need to have is law enforcement or security, somebody to provide that security for everybody else. Beyond that, then you can start doing all your other things, your bakers and your plumbers and your construction workers and your all these other things, but what you need to set first is security. That's why if you are a survivalist, you need to build they call it a boma, right? Where they just build this area around so you have a place that's going to be your own. So you have security from the animals that are going to come in and try to get you while you're sleeping. But that's what we need to have is we need to have law enforcement. We need to have security. We need to have people that are willing to make sure everybody's okay, whether it be your state or your federal, or your city law enforcement to be right there to watch your back. Because there's the point where you're asleep, you're unconscious, you need to rest too. You need to take a break. You need to shut down. You need to be able to go somewhere else for a little while because we're not wired to run nonstop.
No, I agree with you. It reminds me of the movie Officer and Gentleman, where Jack Nicholson's on trial, and he says, you need people like me standing on that wall 24/7, protecting you while you sleep, who are willing to go out and do the things that you don't want to do.
Right.
And that is, never has that been more true today than ever before, whether it's, 9/11, sending our young men and women to Afghanistan to fight terrorism, Al-Qaeda, and then ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and our men and women fighting terrorism around the globe. It's a necessary evil, but not everybody wants to do it, nor should everybody do it. I mean, it's a very specific job, which requires specific job skills.
Right.
And being, you and myself being individuals who have those skills, don't mind going out there, but at least give us the respect and common courtesy to appreciate, the sacrifices that we are making, that when we leave the house, we don't know if we're coming home, and we accept that, and we do it without regret and hesitation. And the same for first responders, firefighters, going into burning buildings, saving lives, for $60,000 a year. Right. We're not making a lot of money. We don't go into law enforcement and military to get rich. We go in out of the sense of duty, loyalty, and responsibility.
Right. Right. And I don't think a lot of people understand that it's not, we're not there to make $1 billion or whatever. And we're also not there to hurt people. We honestly go there to try to help people. But then there's a point where you don't want to help people because people are mean, nasty, hurtful people. So you got to have a different why. You got to have a different understanding of what it is and why you're doing it. And if you've seen enough hurt, you've seen enough death of people, whether in drugs or with, whatever the case is, that could be your why of, I need to go in there and I need to stop this stuff from the beginning because there's so much hurt that it's doing to other people. And if I'm capable, send me, that sort of idea.
No, absolutely. And, every day there are thousands of men and women who put on a uniform, whether police or military, and go out and do the job, even though they know people hate them, that they will be spat upon and they will have to think bricks thrown at them. And that, unfortunately, an officer somewhere today or tomorrow will be shot, injured, or killed, leaving a wife and children behind. But yet we do it. We do it every day. They more so than I, now that I'm retired. But for 33 years, I was willing to do it. And I think people forget that the frontline officer, the guy out there responding to 911 calls, domestic violence calls, drug calls, he's out there alone. He doesn't know what he's going into. He has no backup, no intelligence. He's going in blind and has to make split-second decisions, which will dictate whether he lives or an innocent individual lives or if he may die, right? At least with DEA, I had the luxury of going with a squad of guys. We knew who our target was. We knew where he was. We went in prepared, like the military. We have a plan. Right. We didn't do things on the fly, very rarely. And for that reason, even today, you don't see a lot of agents. I think one agent or two agents been shot severely in the last 10 years, or FBI. So you have to ask yourself, why did the federal agencies, DEA, FBI, U.S. Marshals, ICE, why do they have such a low incident of officers being shot or having to shoot someone? It's because we have the luxury of time, planning, and purpose. Whereas the line officer, he's riding around a squad car going from helping a civilian with a car broken down on a highway to a domestic mental situation, the individual or a knife and a gun. He's first on scene.
Yeah.
Or mass shooting incident to a high school. He's first in the door with a guy who's got an M4, 500 rounds of 7.62 against his 9mm and his 2 rounds of 15-1.
Right.
Right. So we're going into situations where we're not really prepared, and we're still making it work. We're still keeping the streets safe.
Yep. Because you got to do
those are the heroes.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree with that, and we go into stuff that we don't know. And yet we're still making it happen because of training, because of, we've seen, unfortunately, people have gone before and they've not made it out. And we see, okay, how do we mitigate that from happening in the future? How do we make that not happen? And I think that's our big trick.
It's the best trick no one's been able to really figure out yet, because we're still losing officers. Officers are still getting hurt. Mm-hmm. We still have a lot of high crime. And I don't know if we'll ever come to that situation where, policing is going to be, 100% safe. I don't think we'll ever get close to that mark. But what we can do is continue to work with communities, and continue to train officers. But policing has to evolve as criminality evolves.
Yeah.
We cannot afford to be behind, and whether it's protective gear, training, surveillance, investigations, and prosecutions, we have to evolve faster than the criminals do in order to keep up and to maintain some level of civility within our culture.
Yeah, I would agree with that. 100%. So you go through all this different stuff, and you go to, you spend some time in South America, and I'm assuming that wasn't the easiest in the world, right? You saw some hairy stuff.
For me, it was the ideal situation. I loved working in South America. I loved working with the counterparts. I can remember one operation. We were going out to raid a precursor chemical dump site. Basically, It was an area where precursor chemicals were being stored in the jungle, transported to a cocaine laboratory for processing. And we had received some information that there was a small stockpile, maybe a few hundred pounds of various acids and acetones and other chemicals for cocaine production, hidden out way out in some triple canopy jungle, about 200 miles from our base camp. So as we're flying out in these 2 helos, Chalk 1, Chalk 2, it's 4 DEA agents and 4 we call UMAPA, or Bolivian Special Forces, in one helo and the same number in the other helo. So as we're flying out to the location, the red light comes on for the rotor, and it's blinking, which means, you need to sit the helicopter down and fix the problem.
Yeah.
So the pilot, he starts banging on it, and then the light goes off. And I look up and I say in Spanish, is this something we need to worry about? Because we're in triple canopy and there's nowhere light. He's like, no problem. It's okay. It happens all the time, which didn't make me feel any better. Right? It'll be the last time it happens. So we fly in, we get on site, we land about 3 miles from where the stash site is. We have the informant. Now we're walking through, triple canopy jungle. I don't know if you've ever seen triple canopy jungle. It's 3 layers of jungle, and it's 12 o'clock in the afternoon. It looks like it's dark. It's dusk.
Oh, wow.
Because no light is getting through. You have high bush, you have water, vegetation, and we're looking for the path to get to this lab location, of this stockpile location. So the informant who had been out there before, he gets lost. We're wandering around for about 2 hours. We finally find the trail. We get on the trail, and now the informant's like, hey, be careful for booby traps, because they take grenades, they tie them to trees, and this kind of thing. We're like, oh, you should have told us that before we came out. He never mentioned that fact. So
right,
like, okay,
right.
You get in front, you lead the way.
If somebody's getting blown up, it's going to be
it's going to be this guy. So he's leading the way. We get there without incident. There are a few people on scene. They run off into the jungle. We run over, secure the location. And we're looking around, and we catch one person. It was like 15, 16-year-old teenager who was hired to watch the stockpile. He's like, hey, the traffickers, they store the chemicals here. Then they come with boats down the river, and they take it to another location. So we're trying to figure out what the lab is, but he doesn't know. So basically, we've got about 400 pounds of precursor chemicals out in the middle of nowhere. I was the C4 guy. I had been trained in demolitions at Ranger School. So I basically took a pound of C4. We wired it up, put a timer on it, 10-minute timer, and we left the area. And 10 minutes later, you see this huge fireball mushroom go up into the jungle. I look back, probably not the most economical, environmentally safe thing to do. But, we couldn't leave the precursors there for the traffickers to use to make narcotics.
Right.
We couldn't get them out of the jungle because we didn't have the capability. So the only choice was to destroy it on site, which is what we did.
Mm-hmm.
Walk back with our detainee to the helicopters and fly back to base. But that was like a typical operation, Oh, wow. And as you're walking through a triple canopy jungle, I remember in Ranger School, one of the instructors says, "Hey, the thing that's going to kill you in the jungle is not 7.62 from an AK-47, but it's going to be this little colored frog or this snake or this spider or this plant you touch or come in contact with. So pay attention to your surroundings, right? Because it's going to be these things that are going to kill you much faster before a narco trafficker is."
Right.
So you get out to the jungle and you're looking around, and sure enough, you're seeing an bright orange tree frog. Right? It's toxic. You're seeing plants that if you touch, it's toxic. You see a couple of bullmasters or pit vipers that if they bite you, you're going to die in 30 minutes, and you've got no way to save yourself.
Jeez.
Spiders, ants, you name it. Beautiful, but very deadly, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was an educational process. You learn. The Bolivians weren't even worried about it. They're like, it's nothing. Don't worry about it. We'll be fine. And of course, my first time out, I'm like, you say that like it's not going to be an issue.
Yeah, you're walking there with your hands in your pockets and
and you've got the
cinched up to your side.
The old cotton camouflage, right? The green and brown,
right? Completely
buttoned up. You got your gloves. You got your neck covered. It's 120 degrees in the shade, and you were like losing water weight by the second. You're marching through this jungle looking for a couple of 100 pounds of precursor chemicals. But that was the job. Mm-hmm. And in 4 years, I'd have to say in Bolivia, we were very successful in pushing the traffickers deeper and deeper into the Amazon, because the average range of a helo was about 300 miles. So we'd work in a 300-mile radius, and north, south, east, and west radius, neutralize all lab locations, precursor chemical storage locations, clandestine airstrips, hunt down the fugitives. So then they would move out another 200 miles from our radius. So we just kept spiraling out. We pushed them really to the basin of the Amazon jungle, which bordered Colombia. And we began to push the traffickers into Colombia out of Bolivia. But then in 1996, we had an accident. We had a DEA aircraft crashed. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, a number of agents were killed in that situation due to some mechanical errors in the plane. But then the Bolivian government was restricting our access. We were doing too good a job, right? The Bolivian government's like, well, you can't go here, you can't go there, but you can go to this green area. Well, the green area was cleared. There was no more drug trafficking activity happening there. But back to your original question, for me, for a Cincinnati kid, who went to Catholic school, and then worked in store security, transitioning now to the jungle fighting narco traffickers, it was a big shift, but it was probably the best career memory I have.
That's cool. I guess I was getting totally into the stories about you being down there, so we don't have to change gears for that. So that's actually, was the Bolivian government, obviously the drugs that were going in and out, was that because it was helpful to their economy, or was somebody on the payroll somewhere?
Well, unfortunately, it was a level of corruption. And, when you work in certain countries, there's always a level of corruption. But I think in Bolivia, we were beginning to see the influence of what the narco traffickers had on the government. That when you talk about the war on drugs, people say the war on drugs is a failure. I absolutely disagree with that statement, because it's what is the context of that statement, right? The war on drugs within the United States, within the domestic United States, where DEA, FBI, local state police agencies have authority, we are winning that war. We are arresting high-level drug traffickers. We are seizing tons of narcotics. We were prosecuting, and we were keeping America safe. Mm-hmm. The war on drugs outside of the United States, where drugs are produced, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Afghanistan, Myanmar. The U.S. government does not have the capability to fly into those countries and neutralize that problem like we did with terrorism in Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda. Right. If we had that authority, if suddenly tomorrow the administration said, hey, these top 5 cartels in Mexico are classified as terrorist organizations and are our number one threat to the national security of the United States, I guarantee you we'd solve that problem in a week. There'd be no more fentanyl, no more cocaine and heroin coming into this country if we looked at these organizations as significant narco-terrorist threats to the security of the United States. Mm-hmm. That war we could win. But how can we win a war when drugs are produced in another country where we have no influence to effectively eradicate that problem. So the war on drugs is really a two-part war. There's the war on drugs internationally, externally. Mm-hmm. Then there's the war on drugs internally, where we go after local distribution organizations and other aspects, money launderers, et cetera. And DEA has been extremely successful at winning that war, right? Mm-hmm. But not so successful on stopping Mexican cartels. What power does DEA have to stop Sinaloa cartel? We arrested and extradited El Chapo. The organization is still in existence.
Right.
We assisted in killing and taking out Pablo Escobar, but Colombia is now one of the largest drug-producing narco states in the world. So if the United States doesn't have that capability, by law, we are not legally able to cross that border and affect, change, mitigate that threat, then it's not even a war. We're not even in the game, right? We're not even in the game participating. So how can we lose something we're not really involved in? But when it comes to the United States, let me tell you, if DEA sets their sights on you, there's a very good reason, and I guarantee you're going to get prosecuted and go to jail. So that war, we are winning.
That's cool. You know, it's like the team, you know, whatever sports team you want to put it towards, that, you know, they win whatever game they go play, whenever they win. And then so the new high school group, you know, they're going to play a new team, and they come in and it turns out to be this professional team, you know, whether it's football, whether it's soccer, whatever. You're just going to go in there and you're not going to win that game if they decide that they want to play you. But if it's that decision they have to go play, whether or not they have the ability to go play you. If let's say the Rams, you know, they just win the Super Bowl. They won the Super Bowl, right? I'm correct in that because I didn't watch the game.
Rams. Mm-hmm. Sorry. Close game. Good game.
They want to go play your local high school football team. Can they go out and can they put everything they have, their starting players on the front line, and go against this high school football team? Those kids are going to get clobbered, and those guys are probably getting in trouble for, you know, excessive force or, you know, whatever you want to call it, you know. And those poor kids, they'll never play again because they're now crippled because they got beat up pretty bad. Well, I think it's the same way. You're going to take the DEA against these guys, whatever cartel you want to think about, whatever. But at what point is the okay going to be written to say, yeah, go ahead and play those guys? It's rarely ever going to happen because we're so limited in our ability, our reach to go out and do stuff like that, to go deal with those cartels or deal with those groups in South America or Mexico or wherever.
You know, and you're exactly right, Ken. Unfortunately, a lot of the drug issues are intertwined with global trade, you know, other economic issues, State Department, diplomatic issues. You know, we have a very robust trade policy with Mexico, with Colombia, with Peru. There are other considerations. And unfortunately, narcotics production, distribution, and trade is so interwoven into the economy, the global economy, that to press on one aspect of enforcement often can send a ripple effect affecting many other things associated, not directly with drug trafficking, but associated with the flow of money, right? Mm-hmm. The flow of goods, international trade. You know, obviously Mexico wants to protect its trade. They want to continue that relationship. And sometimes perhaps they use that as leverage. Well, you can't come in and disrupt this because it's going to disrupt that, right? So there's always that delicate political balance. And when I worked as a country attaché in many overseas countries, you know, the first thing you go in as a diplomat, not as a DEA agent, but as a diplomat. Mm-hmm. And you have to understand the sensitivities of working in another country, and that U.S. foreign policy comes first to drug enforcement, which means you can't go in there like the cowboy and shake things up because there's a program, there's a format that you have to follow, right? There's a protocol. And unfortunately, that is like a referee who calls you foul on every play and does not call foul on the other team. Right. So you get penalized. Right. But yeah, I mean, if DEA had the authority, if the U.S. government had the authority to go after drug traffickers in Mexico, 6 weeks, it'd be done. You know, this is not a complicated issue. But when these organizations are protected by entities within the states, you know, failed states, or elements of corruption and money, international conventions and treaties, it's a limiting factor that affects DEA's ability to extend that long reach and bring people to justice.
Right.
And if you look at the history, DEA has extradited hundreds of people in the last 50 years from all over the world, prosecute them, and has never lost a case in that prosecution. DEA has one of the longest reaches in law enforcement of any agency to go out and convict an individual of international conspiracy and drug trafficking than any other agency in the United States has. We do it very well. But we can't go out and shut down the drug production laboratories. We can't go out and shut down, more importantly, the precursor chemical supply chains, right, between criminal organizations in Latin America, Chinese drug trafficking organizations, and their association with industrial and pharmaceutical companies in China that knowingly sell precursor chemicals to unknown customers at outrageous prices and ask no questions, right? When you really drill down into the drug production, why does the United States have a drug problem? Why is fentanyl coming across the border? You have to go back to the origin of the problem. What is allowing that to happen? And that is the production of narcotics based on the accessibility of cartels to easily acquire essential precursors and drug production, and then distribute them into the United States. And I always use this example to explain that to people. Imagine you have a garden hose. It's hooked up to where water goes in.
Right.
And as long as that water's in the hose, it's controlled. But as soon as the water hits the spigot and disperses into a million different droplets, it's out of your control. Precursor chemical supply chain are chemicals coming from China to Mexico in that hose. We can control and attack that hose simply by folding it and degrading its ability to get to the end.
Right.
But if those chemicals get to the end of the hose and then go through the spigot and disperse into 1,000 different water droplets, which represent thousands and multi-ton quantities of narcotics being produced and then shipped into the United States, that's almost impossible to catch. And I say, anybody who doesn't believe me, try and go out and catch raindrops in your hand. It's very difficult, if not impossible.
Right. And I think that's the trick there, isn't it? It's that precursor thing. It's that those little portions that make the full thing. You go back to the 80s and 90s when everybody was talking about mobile meth labs and stuff like that, or they'd have a meth lab in their backyard or whatever. And, a lot of more rural areas would have that. But they've talked about the mobile meth lab, and then be careful of it because there's so many chemicals in there. If you take away a number of those chemicals, they don't have a rolling meth lab anymore. And that's the thing. You take away the little things, you're not going to have the big thing, right? When you're that's a great example. I'm glad you brought that up, Ken, because it reminds me of the movie Breaking Bad, which everybody has seen. Right.
But when DEA and state and local law enforcement realized that we had a growing methamphetamine problem in the United States, as you said, mobile labs, bathtub labs, people making meth in their house, people going on the internet, downloading the formulas, and then going to a store like Home Depot and buying all the precursors. But the primary precursor you needed to make meth was pseudoephedrine, ephedrine or pseudoephedrine. And as you recall, 20 years ago, you could go into a store and buy cough syrup or diet control pills that had ephedrine and pseudoephedrine in them.
Right.
So traffickers would just go into the store, go into a Kmart or wherever, and buy thousands of these ephedrine and pseudoephedrine strips, take them back to the lab, and then make methamphetamine. Pseudoephedrine and ephedrine are precursors for methamphetamine.
Right.
So what did DEA do? He said, hey, we're going to regulate it. You can't buy it. You need a prescription. Put it behind the counter. And overnight, the U.S. methamphetamine problem shifted to Mexico.
Right.
We ended that
now.
problem.
where it is now.
Yeah. Where it grows and does extremely well. So the key to that was controlling the access to the chemicals, to the precursors. People weren't willing to come in, couldn't get behind the counter and buy 10,000 strips of ephedrine and pseudoephedrine.
Right.
So it made it very difficult to get those chemicals. And then we see the paradigm change. Local and domestic traffickers then go on the internet and say, hey, let's order fentanyl from China because it's just as addictive as morphine, 100 times more addictive than morphine, 50 times more addictive than heroin.
And way more powerful, too. Yeah.
And way more powerful. So we see a cottage industry grow up in the United States where people are now online buying pharmaceutical-grade fentanyl from China, and now we're seeing fentanyl distributed to the United States. So we can't have this. So DEA, U.S. Postal Service, investigations, customs, we got together, and we said we got to get this regulated. So we went to China and said you got to regulate fentanyl and its analogs. And then U.S. Postal put in a system where they started to be able to identify these parcels of fentanyl coming from China. So through regulation and State Department efforts with China and U.S. postal investigations and interdiction capabilities, we were able really to shut down the direct line source of supply of fentanyl from Chinese suppliers to U.S. drug trafficking organizations.
Mm-hmm.
But what did that do? That created a void. Mexican cartels said, hey, that's a pretty good deal. Let's just get the precursors from China. We'll bring them to Mexico and we'll mass produce. And we'll buy the pill presses as well because no one else can get to us. We are protected.
Right.
So China regulates fentanyl and some of its analogs, but they don't regulate the precursors and what's called precursors. And these are simply chemicals that have dual purpose use, right? One chemical can be used to clean your carpet, and then it can be used to make ephedrine or methamphetamine.
Ah.
So there's a loophole in there.
Right.
So the cartels exploited that loophole. And then the companies in China, hey, why is this shoe company in Mexico ordering 50 metric tons of this chemical? Because that really exceeds their limit of what they could possibly use. But, they're looking at it strictly business. They're not really looking at know your customer.
Right.
And maybe we shouldn't sell to people we don't know. It's about profit. Like you said earlier, it's about making money.
Mm-hmm.
So the cartels have used this huge void that was created by U.S. law enforcement by doing a good job, created a void the cartels in Mexico now exploit to their benefit.
Right.
So now we see more fentanyl coming in the U.S. Of course, the border policies and border enforcement, it's not what it used to be. That's a different conversation, probably for a different day.
You're right.
On that situation. But let's just say the border situation has made it easier for cartels to smuggle narcotics into the United States at an alarming rate.
Right. And it's easy to just get somebody to go down, whether it's San Diego or El Paso or whatever, and you just right over there get their stuff, and these guys don't have to come far over the border because they'll find distributors, American distributors, to just come down and be your traffickers and drive that stuff to wherever, whether it's going to Ohio or whether it's going to Montana or whatever.
And if anyone doubted the efficiency of drug coyotes, coyote being an individual who specializes in smuggling people and drugs across the border, anybody who doubted the complexity and the organizational capabilities of coyotes and drug trafficking organizations can see that over 2 million people have been smuggled across that border successfully. That shows that there is an extensive organization in Mexico that specializes in crossing that border illegally. They can move people, they can move drugs, they can move weapons, they can move money, without any problem whatsoever.
Right.
And with a handful of, CBP officers working the border, now all doing administrative efforts, the border basically is wide open for these coyotes and drug traffickers to work in unison to smuggle multi-ton quantities of fentanyl, which have of lately, we have 100,000 unintentional overdose related deaths, 70% related to fentanyl abuse. And all the experts indicated that number by this time next year, it could be 180 to 200,000.
Jeez.
So as we come out of COVID, we're still in a fentanyl or drug epidemic that is taking more and more lives as young as 13 and 14 years old every day.
Right. I went to just recently. There was a girl that I've dealt with. I've known since she was 13. I didn't know her I knew her professionally as in a police officer and somebody I dealt with all the time. And from 13 years old, always causing hate and discontent and running away and being a general nuisance to society, to growing up and just getting hooked into that world. And now we went to her. Somebody found her dead the other day with, because of fentanyl. She had fentanyled herself to death, and because heroin just wasn't strong enough anymore, and it was easier to get or whatever. And
and people need to understand how these paradigms work, right? For when people say drug addict, what is a drug addict, right? A drug addict is someone who's been using narcotics, heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine for maybe 5 to 10 years, right? Traditionally speaking. And traditionally speaking, the drug addicts who were unintentionally overdosing, leading to fatalities, were heroin users. Traditional heroin users.
Right.
So then we had the opioid epidemic where people were abusing pain prescriptions and getting addicted on codeine, oxycodone, and what have you.
Right.
Investigations, regulations, pharmaceutical companies get shut down, doctors go to jail, and now a doctor can only prescribe you 6 Tramadol or 6-codeine every 4 weeks. Well, if you're addicted to painkillers, you're going to go through that in a week.
Right.
So where are you going to go get your refill? Well, you can't go to your doctor. So now you're going to go to the street, and then those individuals are going to buy heroin.
Mm-hmm.
So they transition from a painkiller addiction to a opioid-based painkiller, which is heroin, and they get addicted. Now fentanyl comes in, and the heroin is mixed or laced with fentanyl, and then those individuals wind up overdosing.
Right.
That's the old paradigm. The new paradigm are individuals who are hooked on pills, but they're not traditional drug users. They don't use cocaine, heroin, or methamphetamine. They like pills, Xanax, what's the one I'm thinking of? Percocets.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And other, like you go in your mother's prescription, your cabinet, and you see all kinds of pills.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So kids were taking those pills and not dying, right? Hey, they go to school. Hey, I got a backache. Wrestling practice was tough. Hey, I'll get you a Xanax from my mom's closet. But that Xanax isn't from the closet. The kid bought the Xanax from a drug dealer on the street who said it was Xanax, and it's 100% fentanyl. It's got like maybe 1 milligram of fentanyl and baby powder mixed into it.
Right.
Kid takes the Xanax and he dies immediately, right? 1 pill and he's dead. That's the new paradigm. People who normally take pills are taking or buying pills which aren't what they're represented to be, and now they're dying.
Right.
So that linear increase that we saw over the last 20 years from heroin and methamphetamine overdoses, which was still linear, but then we see that sharp spike going almost straight up. That's the new paradigm related to fentanyl and pills.
Okay, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And now we're seeing people as young as 13 and 14 years old in that new paradigm. Where in the old paradigm, maybe we saw 16, 17, I think average age was 24. 24 to 35 or older were your traditional heroin addicts who were steadily dying at an increased rate due to heroin addiction.
Right.
But, if you're taking one Xanax, you're not a drug addict. You're not addicted to Xanax. You got a backache. You can't get it from your doctor. So you go to your buddy who bought it from some guy on the street who said it was Xanax. You take it and you die. Right. It's still an overdose.
Right.
Because you're taking more than your body can handle. Right. And you die. Right.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you can die from almost any substance. If you overtake too much sugar at one time, you could probably die from that.
I've heard of people dying of water, too much water intake.
Too much of anything.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Can kill you.
Yeah.
Especially if it's something as lethal and as addictive as fentanyl. So that's the new paradigm that we're seeing, which is responsible for the spike and increase in deaths, especially among teenagers.
Right. One of the things is during this time, go back, 5-10 years, what we started noticing was people would, they would do heroin or whatever, and then they would go to jail or go to prison or whatever for a prolonged period of time. When they get out, they think that they can take the same amount of heroin or same amount of opium that they were able to take previously, and they take it, and that's when they were having the overdoses. So then that was the big thing. People start realizing, okay, we have overdoses. Now they start having Narcan or naloxone available to them, and you find that everybody has that sitting in their pocket or whatever, ready to go. And so that's how you know. Well, you say, how did you get hooked into this? And like you said, it was, I got in a car crash when I was younger, or, whatever the case is, hydrocodone, oxycodone, whatever. I started taking those. And then when they wouldn't refill it, I still had the pain. I had to do something. Start going into that thing. But like you said, people just start taking whatever. It's the same thing that they had with that Tide Pod challenge or whatever. All these little challenges. Oh, do this. And just because you can do something or somebody else is doing it or doesn't hurt them doesn't mean it's going to not affect you that way. You're not built the exact same way as somebody else is built. And so somebody might be able to do something that you cannot.
Exactly. I mean, and even today, when we were kids, when I was young, we did stupid things. That's what kids do, 13, 14 years old. You do dumb things. Some kids, maybe they took their parents' pain medications, or they drank liquor from their father's cabinet, or they smoked some cigarettes, or they smoked some marijuana, right? It didn't kill you. Maybe you were really sick the next day, or you got in trouble, but you didn't die, right? Yeah. Kids do dumb things. The dumb things kids are doing today is they're taking pills from their buddies and thinking it's okay, and then they die. So the new normal is a new normal that can kill you, right? Behaviors have to change if we're going to keep our youth from dying from this scourge, this fentanyl scourge that is upon us.
Right.
There's simply no way to stop an individual who has it in his or her mind that want to go buy what they think is a fake Xanax. They're going to go do it.
Mm-hmm.
Kids do stupid things.
Right.
But they have to understand that stupid thing could kill them, that it's very real.
Right.
It's like playing Russian roulette with a 5-cylinder gun. You got 4 bullets in 5 cylinders, right? So you're hoping to get that 1 cylinder that's empty, that one fentanyl pill that doesn't have so much fentanyl in it that you can take and survive.
Right.
But if you get those other 4 pills that have too much fentanyl in it, you're dead.
Right.
And that's the game that our kids are playing now. They're playing Russian roulette with a 5-cylinder gun with 4 bullets in each cylinder. 1 cylinder is empty, and they're spinning it, and they're taking that pill, and the majority of them are dying. Right. So we have to get public messaging out. We have to change old behaviors to adjust to the new threat.
Right. And I was just gonna say, I agree. I think education is our number one thing that we need to get out there, and we're too busy coddling people. Oh, you want to do that? Okay, let's go ahead and do that. No, you have to put that educate and show them the actual horrors that will occur if they don't take care of themselves.
Yeah, you're absolutely. Back in my day, there was no such thing as closing my door and having privacy. I think one day I got in an argument with my mom after my father died. Closed my door and locked it. She came upstairs with some screw, took the door off the hinge. And I didn't have a door for 6 months. She says, you have no privacy in this house. She'll come in, she searched my room, make sure I wasn't smoking marijuana, make sure there was nothing else in the house that she didn't want in the house. I didn't have a cell phone, obviously, back in the day. But if I had one, I guarantee you, she would have had the code to it. Uh-huh. She would have had the code to my laptop, and she would know everything that I was doing.
Yeah.
Kids today have, in my opinion, too much privacy. Parents treat their kids like friends or like equals and not like kids.
Agreed.
They're afraid to say, I want to give my kid some space. I want to treat him as an adult. Well, hey, that little bit of adulthood you're giving him is going to allow him or her to make some bad decisions and possibly take one of these pills. Because everybody's on social media. These kids are all on social media. Do parents know what their kids are talking about on Facebook?
Nope.
On Tinder?
Not 100
on
times.
TikTok? Are they involved in monitoring the social media contacts of their kids and seeing what they're doing? Who are they doing? Do they know where their kids' friends live?
Right.
They don't know any of this. And then they're surprised when their kid took a Xanax from somebody they never heard of at a party they didn't know the kid was at, and he passes away. And I'm not blaming parents, but what I'm saying is we have to change our attitudes. We have to change how we perceive the threat today to our children. It's very, very real.
Right. And I think that family dynamic is important. I think the idea that, you say you're not blaming parents. I think there is some onus that they need to be taken. Parents do need to absolutely take some blame because you're responsible for your child. But on the other side of it, there's places like the government or whatever who will make sure that, if you want to have an abortion, you want to get prescribed, whatever kind of birth control or whatever, you don't have to tell your parents, and we're not going to tell your parents either. What kind of fairness is that? I mean, how is a parent supposed to raise their child? And so I think it's important, and I love that idea that what your mom did. I'm in charge of you. I'm responsible for you. You're not going to get some privacy. You're under my roof. Yeah. That's how it is.
Exactly. My mom, I remember my mom was also a minister as well, spoke Greek and Hebrew, in addition to teaching master's courses in math. Extremely educated, extremely well-versed. And she said, one day we got in an argument again. I mean, I'm 16, 17 years old. I want to go to a party. I'm a grown man, do what I want to do.
Right.
She says, you're a grown man. She says, okay, you're too old. You're too big to fight with. She says, I'll be right back. She went downstairs. She comes back with a suitcase. She starts packing all my clothes up. I said, what are you doing? She says, well, you're a big man. You don't have to live here anymore. So you need to move out.
Yeah.
I said, no, you don't understand, Mom. I'm not that big. She says, no, you're going to tell me you're a big man. You're going to tell me what you're going to do. I'm telling you, here's your suitcase. Go. Push me to the door. Push me out the front door. About 6 hours went past. Right? She says, why are you still standing on the porch, big man? Call your friends and I'm crying now at this point.
Right.
I'm like, I'm sorry.
I'm a man.
Forgive me, Mom. I'm not a man. I can't do it, Mom. She says, well, here are the rules. It happens again, you're gone.
Right.
Of course, she would have never kicked me out, right? But she's playing tough parenting, tough love.
Yeah.
And I tell you what, from that day on, Ken, my mom never had a problem out of me ever again at 16.
Right. That's cool.
Not one problem. Be home at 7. I was home at 6:45.
Right.
All right. Get a job, shoveling driveways, stocking shelves. You want money? Go get a job. I'm not giving you any money. I'm not giving you. You haven't earned. Why should I give you a salary? Why should I give you, what do you call it?
Allowance.
Not a salary, but why should I give you an allowance? What have you done to deserve any money?
Right.
You sit here and eat my food, spend my electricity. You're sucking things from me, but you're not contributing anything.
Right.
So if you want an allowance, you're going to cut the grass, take the garbage out. And you know what? It taught me responsibility at a very, very young age. And it taught me the value of a dollar, especially a dollar that I made. Right. Which kept me out of trouble when my friends were drinking and doing marijuana. And I was like, hey, that's not me. I'm out here. I'm not staying at this party. And I began to create a friend base of friends who were like me, who thought like me, who had the same parental guidelines and restrictions. And we were kind of the outsiders because we were like, hey, we're not doing it. Well, then you're not part of the club. Well, then I don't want to be part of the club.
Right.
Kids today are killing themselves because they can't be part of the club or someone's bullying them on social media, right? I think kids have lost something today. You know, back in my day, you could get beat up, you could get teased, and you went on. You carried on.
Right.
Right? But today, the resiliency of our youth has somehow been weakened, I think, through social media interactions, the need to belong.
I would agree.
The need to be accepted. You know, I'm too fat, I'm too skinny, my hair's not the right color, I don't have the right gym shoes, and this is causing emotional stress, right? And I don't understand that.
Right.
But then that behavior makes people extremely acceptable, or not acceptable, but extremely open to bad influences such as narcotics, pills, right? Smoking, gateway drugs. There's a vulnerability there that can be exploited and is often exploited.
Right. You know, you mentioned, you just said gateway drugs. Now, I've got a theory, and maybe you can help me with this, or you know, whether you agree with it or not, I don't know. But I talked to a kid one time, and I was like, hey, marijuana, marijuana is a gateway drug. And he said, no, it's not. It's not a gateway drug. Marijuana's not bad. It's okay. All this different stuff. I said, okay. Everybody that I know that does heroin, meth, cocaine, whatever, they started out doing marijuana. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody that does marijuana is going to end up doing heroin, meth, cocaine, whatever. His rebuttal was, okay, just because everybody that drinks milk is going to grow up to be, everybody that was a serial killer is they drank milk when they were a little kid. So everybody that drinks milk is going to be a serial killer. I said, no, that makes absolutely no sense. There's no correlation toward that. However, I totally see that everybody that I've ever met, I've dealt with, I've been on a couple committees and stuff like that in regards to local area drug enforcement and all this different stuff. This sort of thing, the thing they did first was they tried cigarettes, they drank, and they smoked weed. And then they ultimately graduate into meth, heroin, cocaine, whatever. But there's a hard distinction, and people don't see marijuana as being a problem. But I honestly
and that's
think
the people who don't see the problem are the people it never affected, right? Not everybody who drinks alcohol is an alcoholic, but everybody who's an alcoholic drank a whole lot of alcohol, starting with beer before they became an alcoholic. So you have to look at it in context. So when you look at the number of people who are drug addicts, I guarantee you every one of those addicts, people who are addicted to cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, or whatever, started out smoking marijuana, started out smoking cigarettes, and kept looking for the next high. Why do you think people are willingly going from heroin to fentanyl? Because they want that next high. It's all about the next high.
Right.
That's why NPSs or new psychotropic substances sell so well, because the value of the high keeps increasing. So people are going to chase that dragon. People are going to look and search out the next evolution in drug usage. What's going to make me feel better than the drug I took yesterday? Right. That's just the natural progression of addiction. You get into the pharmacology, you get into the anatomy, you get into the neurological system of the body. You know, if you're taking sweet and low, and then you go to real sugar, cane sugar, what's your body going to tell you? Hey, that cane sugar is much better.
Yeah.
Let's do the cane sugar. Let's do the enhanced sugar. And now you're obese because you're eating enhanced pure sugar as opposed to a sweet and low sugar. So there is a connectivity between drugs of lesser psychotropic effect that lead to drugs with greater psychotropical effect. There's definitely a nexus there. And even the next nexus in marijuana, I think there was a case in Connecticut where they found someone died by lacing marijuana with fentanyl.
Yeah, I've heard that.
That's the next high.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Right?
It's kind of that super low. I mean, you're really going to mellow out at that point, you know?
Right. And you're talking about pharma grade, high quality marijuana. Marijuana in my day, you pulled it out of the ground, you rolled it up. Maybe it was, 3% psychotropic substance.
Right.
THC levels now are in excess of 3 to 4% or higher. Now you have designer marijuana where they specifically go in and create extremely high THC levels. THC is the chemical in the marijuana that gives it the psychotropic effect.
Right.
So now they're growing marijuana that is designed to specifically give you a greater psychotropic effect, a greater high. So if there's no nexus, then why create a higher strand of marijuana that leads you to a higher strand of marijuana, right? What's the incentive? Well, it's money. People pay money for a 25% THC marijuana, then they will pay for a 3% THC marijuana. Right. So there is a natural connectivity between improved narcotics and addiction and the evolution of a drug user from, alcohol, a one beer to a 6-pack a day to a bottle of whiskey every other day.
Right.
So the argument your friend had, you were talking to, maybe he's talking about himself. I know plenty of people who can go out and drink and have a high tolerance and not get drunk.
Right.
I know other people who go out and have one drink and can fall off a stool.
Yep.
So you really have to look at, it's an individual gauge. But when you're looking at a study group of 100,000 people, out of that 100,000 people, probably 80 to 90% of them have started out with gateway drugs and now are addicted to other substances.
Right. I would agree with that. So you mentioned going overseas, going to all these different countries. You mentioned Myanmar a little bit ago, and what I understand is you did some specific, I guess, historical work there of a certain type. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was the DEA country attaché in Myanmar from 2017 to 2019. As the country attaché, I ran the DEA office and was the primary liaison with the government of Myanmar with what they call their Drug Enforcement Division, which was their DEA. So we worked directly with them on counter-narcotic investigations. And of course, many people may not know Myanmar is the world's largest producer of methamphetamine and the second largest producer of heroin next to Afghanistan. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which would take hours to get into. But let's just say that Myanmar has some very significant criminal organizations that have been able to successfully set up operations in which give them certain autonomy from government intrusion, from police, and from the military because of where they live and who they are. Mm-hmm. So aside from that, I met with the police, and I said, because there's really no drug nexus between Myanmar and the United States, right? Myanmar is the Mexico for Australia. What I mean by that, Australia's drug problem, methamphetamine, is sourced from Myanmar.
I see. Okay.
So for them, it's a big issue. But DEA works globally. We look for international connectivity, drug trafficking organizations, money laundering that have links to the United States. But in this case, there was no direct link to the United States. So I met with my counterparts, DED, and I said, what's your problem? They said, Mike, our problem is methamphetamine. All this methamphetamine is produced in Eastern Shan State, which is controlled by these ethnic armed groups that are in a civil war with the government, and the police are not allowed to go into that area. So imagine the state of Texas is run by an ethnic armed group, and the DEA or the U.S. military can't go into Texas to effect arrest and degrade the drug trafficking activity because it's in the middle of a civil revolution, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So you have this part of Myanmar, Eastern Shan State, which has maybe 12 to 13 different ethnic insurgency groups which have been in a civil war with the government of Myanmar for the last 60 years. Best kept secret in the world. So the police can't go into these areas because they're hot zones. But the drug traffickers, who are at the same time, they're the ethnic armed groups, right? Mm-hmm. They're wearing two hats. They're fighting the government and they're producing narcotics make money to fight the government. So Myanmar, the police said, we can't go in there. This is where all the labs are, Mike. So how do we degrade this problem? I said, well, let's look at this problem. Methamphetamine is 100% synthetic, which means it requires chemicals, massive amounts of chemicals to support the quantity of methamphetamine they're making. So let's look at a map. Here's the Eastern Shan states, the northern border. You've got China, you've got jungle. And here you have a city called Musée, MUSC, which is the official land border between China and Myanmar. Mm-hmm. I said to him, how much trade comes across that border from China every day? Oh, thousands of trucks come across that border. Right. Well, what kind of trucks? Do you ever see chemicals being shipped across? Of course, Myanmar has a very small chemical production. We buy all our chemicals from China, and then those chemicals go down into Myanmar, various industries and whatnot. But, Michael, you know some of those chemicals are going into Eastern Shan State, but we don't really know what precursor chemicals are. We don't know how to discern what a precursor is, if it's used for methamphetamine or is it going to be used to make leather products. Right. I said, well, your problem is not a law enforcement problem. It's a scientific problem. You simply need to be able to tell if a barrel of, let's say it says hydrogen peroxide is actually hydrogen peroxide, or is it P2P or ether or benzene or sodium cyanide used to make methamphetamine. They're like, yeah, but how do we do that, Mike? We don't know how to do that. So I started researching companies that produce drug identification technology using what's called a laser light spectrum. And basically what that is a device shoots a laser into a substance. Now, narcotic substances, cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, all have what's called a color signature. So when the laser hits cocaine molecules, it heats it up and it creates a color spectrum. I think that color may be orange. I'm not sure. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, cocaine is orange, methamphetamine is blue, and heroin is purple. Okay. So anytime that laser hits one of those substances, those molecules light up and it tells you exactly what it is. Same thing for precursor chemicals. Every substance has a light spectrum associated with it. It's basically a digital fingerprint. Okay. Right? So you have sodium cyanide that has a specific light signature. So I started researching all these devices, and I came across a device called the Regaku. Rescue, REQ, CQL, 1064, light laser. 1064 is the laser aspect, and it's the highest registered laser of any of these devices. So I started shopping around, talking to some friends, the DEA chemist I knew. He's like, Regaku probably makes the best device, but it's expensive. I said, how much is it? $60,000 for a handheld device. Mm-hmm. But it's the best, right? So I started researching, and I said, this is the device we have to get for the police. So I wrote up a proposal called Operation Viper, which included bringing over DEA chemists to teach the counterparts what are precursor chemicals, what should they be looking for in inspection. Right. And then I was able to get money from INL. INL is a International Narcotics Bureau Association for the State Department. They fund and support DEA with training and equipment purchases. Mm-hmm. So I wrote up a pilot program to buy 3 Regaku CQL 1064 lasers. The assumption being that with this device, the counterparts could then do inspections on chemicals coming across the border, determine if they were going to be used for methamphetamine, heroin production, or were they legitimate precursors. So I got the money, we did the training, and within a week of application, within a week of implementing the strategy, the police went out and seized 7 to 8 metric tons of precursor chemicals that would have previously gotten past the border checkpoints. Holy cow. One seizure was benzene, a particular type, there's a number of benzenes. One seizure was like, 60 to 80, 800 pounds of benzene. And then one officer said, in the past, I used to let this benzene come across with no documentation because I had no idea it could be used for making methamphetamine. So I stopped the truck driver. He says, I don't know what's in it. There's no labels. He tested it. It was benzene. The Regaku screen lit up with a red signature saying, hey, benzene, warning, this can be used to make methamphetamine. The truck driver had no documentation, so the police seized it using the Regaku analysis, saying that it's most likely or could be used for making methamphetamine. Uh-huh. So then the driver says to the police officer, well, hey, I've made several other deliveries in the last couple of weeks to this place down the road a little ways. I'll show you where it's at. So they take the driver, They go to this location, off-road somewhere. It has a warehouse, and it is literally full of precursor chemicals and methamphetamine. It was one of the most significant seizures in like the beginning of 2018 they ever made. Wow. all based off of that one device, right? So I wrote up the program. I said, hey, this is a success. This is the program we need to be implementing. We need to be implementing scientific technology to degrade the precursor chemical supply chain, which is fueling the production of methamphetamine, which is going to Australia, China, some to Japan, and to Taiwan, right? With the simple application. Remember that fire hose?
Yeah.
We're just going to bend that fire hose. We're going to cut off that chemical supply, which is going to degrade the capabilities. Let's say if we can degrade 60 to 70%, that's a huge success.
Right.
Because they can't get the chemicals, they can't make the cake. Can't bake the cake without flour.
Right.
So I wrote up the proposal, gave it to the State Department, DEA. There were some internal issues. Some of the pushback from my own age was, well, who are you going to arrest? We're here to arrest people. I'm like, no, it's not about arresting people. We have to change our focus and mentality. Putting people in jail is not always the answer. We cannot arrest our way out of the situation. We cannot shoot our way out of the situation. We have to look at things, and I've heard this saying, you have to follow the science sometimes.
Right.
And if following the science this time, it said that chemical identification is a way to disrupt these drug traffickers, because it really it's one of the most exposed aspects of any drug trafficking organization, which they have no control over. Chemicals have to be shipped from point A to point B, and in between point A and point B is where I have access to disrupt their capabilities that they cannot control.
Right. Right.
I can't affect it at the beginning, and I can't affect it at the end, but I can affect that piece in the middle because it's exposed. It's an open wound. It's a wire that's exposed, and I can get in and manipulate that. But I need the right technology and funding to do it. But the government's slow to change.
Sure.
Right. So unfortunately, my tenure in that assignment ended in 2019. I was transferred back to Washington. Since then, Myanmar had a coup, and now the U.S. has sanctions, and we can no longer assist Myanmar with their interdiction capabilities. But before the coup, they had purchased an additional 3 scanners, bringing it up to 6. But here's an interesting story. After I left, they were doing so well with the scanners that the drug traffickers attacked one of the police checkpoints, killed the police officer, burned down the station, and destroyed the Ragaku. That whole operation was to destroy their ability to scan those chemicals.
Jeez.
And that shows you how much of a threat that electronic canine, that's what I call it, electronic canine, was to trafficking organizations, because they understood if we can't get these chemicals across, then the people who supply the chemicals will be reluctant because they're going to take a financial loss.
Right.
Or if I pay them, I can't get my money back. So we're unprotected because, again, that part of the supply chain is exposed. Right? This same concept can be applied to chemicals going to Mexico, going to Colombia, going to Peru, but it would take, a whole of government approach involving the State Department, U.S. intelligence agencies, HSI, DEA working together to identify, because really it's a matter of big data. When you think about it, right? Things are shipped from China. There's documentation, but it's a matter of understanding, having the analytical capabilities to sort through massive amounts of data and find that needle in the haystack that says, let's look at that container.
Right. Right.
And you only have to hit a couple of containers to disrupt the supply chain. Well, the suppliers in China say, hey, this is too risky. We're not doing it anymore, because the money trail is going to lead back to who? It's going to lead back to those companies. Right. And they don't want the Chinese government knocking on our door saying, hey, DEA is saying you're supporting drug trafficking, and we're going to have to arrest you and you're going to disappear. Right. Right. That would be the ripple effect, the back chain effect, the backlash to doing a project like that. Right. But again, our system of law enforcement, I think, is too focused on making arrests and trying to arrest our way out of this. And just in my opinion, of 33 years, it's important to make arrests, but that cannot be the winning aspect of this game. Arrests are important, but really, if you want to get to the root cause of drug problem, drug addiction, drug production, you have to get to the drug source of supply, which is the precursor chemical supply chain. And that's why when I retired, Ragaku called me and says, hey, we like what you did in Myanmar. We have a lot of smart people here who can make really cool things, but we need someone who understands how to apply that technology to a very specific problem set, that's drug production. Right. Right. So they created a position for me, Director of Counter-Narcotics Interdiction Partnerships, where I designed counter-narcotic strategies similar to those I designed in Myanmar. Mm-hmm. And we're working with Pakistan, we're working with other countries on implementing similar strategies that are faced with, either a transit problem where precursor chemicals are coming through, or precursor chemicals are coming to their country for the illicit production of for narcotics. Right.
Right. That's cool. I mean, that is the fact that they developed a position for you because of the success you had there. That makes such a huge difference because, like I said, it was a historical thing. They'd never been able to get that many precursor substances. That knocked the drug trade down significantly to the point where now drug folks were wanting to kill the cops and destroy the equipment because of it. So when you start seeing something like that, it's actually it's causing a difference. But you turn it around and say we're gonna do this now here, and so you have all these other countries. Do you see that Rigaku and everything else being used here in the United States?
It's used heavily in the United States. I mean, Rigaku's primary focus was supporting law enforcement but it was being used in a post-drug seizure analysis. So police go in, they seize a bunch of drugs, they use the Rigaku to say, okay, it's coke, it's heroin, it's methamphetamine, what have you. Post-seizure, right? It does, and that's a critical aspect in understanding what you have. But what is it really doing to negate or degrade the ability of the trafficking organization to make and then supply those chemicals? So I said to Rigaku, yes, you have a space, an important space here in the United States, but the real effectiveness of this device is internationally in countries where drugs are being produced, because the greatest thing you bring to the game is your library, which has 13,000 different chemical compositions and explosives and chemical weapons in it. So, you're not going to find drug labs in the United States where those chemicals are going to be used. Right. It's not here. That application of that tool will be wasted. So let's take it overseas and let's work with the foreign counterparts and show them how this technology can aid them in degrading the ability of trafficking organizations to mass produce narcotics simply by going after their chemicals, their chemical brokers, and how they procure these chemicals. Because there's a money trail. Money has to move back and forth. There's vulnerabilities.
Right.
It's what I call attacking the critical capabilities of drug supply or drug trafficking organizations. They all have critical capabilities. One of those critical capabilities is they have to be able to procure precursor chemicals. They have to be able to transport precursor chemicals, right?
Right.
And then they have to be able to store and process those narcotics, and they have to be able to pay for them, which is part of the procurement process. Those are all vulnerable. It's critical. They have to have them, and that's what we go after. We go after the critical capabilities. And even if we can only get one critical capability, we can go after their ability to procure, which means move money back and forth, and then to transship, and then use Rigaku to identify what's coming into the port through our analytical process, screening the data, what looks good, let's go after these containers. Then we can reduce their ability to produce narcotics.
Right.
And the ripple effect of that, as I said earlier, the individual supplying the narcotics and the individuals who are supplying the precursors and the individuals who are transporting the precursors via maritime will step back and say, hey, we don't want to do that. As soon as you arrest somebody from a huge transportation network and you convict him for 40 years, I guarantee you all those maritime organizations that are making those questionable transshipments, they're going to back away from that. They're going to charge so much money that it's going to be unproductive for the cartel to continue doing it.
Right. And so that's how we're going to get Mexico or Bolivia or whatever mitigated, because they're no longer able to get shipments and stuff coming to them. Because we're not really going to be able to, no, that's fine. We're not really going to be able to use anything to get those either cartels or the governments there in those South American countries to kind of fall in line and say, yeah, drugs are bad, we shouldn't be doing them here. Correct.
What we're not going to do, we're not going to get Mexico to go out and go after all the drug cartels, make all the arrests. But what they will do is they'll go to the port. They have a port interdiction team, and they'll look in containers, right? So we make it as easy as possible. Hey, we're not asking you to go out and arrest, get in shootouts, and fight with drug cartels. We're just simply saying, let us send a couple of DEA agents down, a couple of analysts who can go through the raw data, and let's start punching into some of these containers using this Rigaku technology to identify what we think are suspicious containers. Because there's nowhere else for a container to come into except a port.
Right.
If you've got a ship that's got like 1,000 containers on it, it's not like you can secretly take a container off that weighs 40 tons, right?
Right.
And smuggle it. It's got to come into the port. It's got to go on a crane. It's got to go on a truck, and it's got to go disappear to a drug lab somewhere.
Right.
We attack the critical vulnerability. We attack the critical capability of that organization. And those countries will say, okay, yeah, because they're doing that now, but they're not doing it efficiently.
Right. Because I don't know. You think about, I think let's take Mexico, for instance, it's getting, people even talking about, as far as tourism down there is getting difficult because of cartels and whatever. You need to watch yourself and this various stuff. But the government, it's not very helpful, because it seems that you always hear about the government is, on the take, or, the cops there are crooked as it is, and other stuff like that. So there's got to be, but everybody's human. So everybody has to get to that point where they realize, okay, this is not healthy for my country, my people, my family, my life. We've got to do something about this, because this is absolute poison coming into my country, or whatever the case is. How do we get people, more and more people, to be willing to, I don't know, play ball, to do that with us?
I think at some point, I always use the example of cancer, right? You can, there's always that patient who goes to the doctors. Yeah, I've been feeling sick for like the last several years. And it's like, well, yeah, you got stage 4 cancer. If you come in earlier, we could have saved you. But in order to save you now, we're going to have to put you on a very, very extreme regimen of chemo and radiation and several other things. And these processes, in order to save you, could possibly kill you. And that's how it is with drug trafficking in narco states. It's been allowed to go on unchecked, significantly or seriously unchecked, for so many years. I think Mexico is at a state where it can't do anything, right? You're seeing shootouts in Cancun and luxurious hotels.
Yeah.
And the police are like, we can't stop it. And the drug trafficking groups, Sinaloa and CJ&G and the other cartels, are so large now that they could actively compete and resist the government if they wanted to. Right. But of course, Mexico doesn't want a civil war. They don't want an internal war, an open war like we saw in Colombia. Pablo Escobar blew up an airliner, blew up a building, shot people in the parliament.
Right.
And that was 20 years ago. Imagine what they can do now with the weapons they have. They're just as violent now as they were in the days of Pablo Escobar. And, does the government of Mexico really want to go toe to toe? Because thousands and thousands of people will die.
Right.
The cartels don't care.
Yep.
Right.
And they don't care if it's theirs or yours or what. Yeah.
No, I mean, the attitude there is, hey, well, they killed several police officers in Guadalajara years ago and hung their headless bodies up on a bridge. That shows you the level of violence in which these people, I mean, this is ISIS ISIS Mexico, right?
Yeah.
Calling themselves Sinaloa. That's how bad these guys are. I would put them right next to ISIS. Their motivation is money. It's not religion. It's certainly money. And I would say money is probably a greater motivator than religion in some aspects.
Sometimes, yeah.
When it comes to these cartels, money is their religion. It is their God.
Yeah.
And they will do anything to sustain that practice. And they know they're killing people with fentanyl, but it's all about the money, right? So unfortunately, I think Mexico is at a point where physical violence, physical resistance is not an answer. So I say, okay, let's just maintain. Let's go to the ports. Let's put $75 million, let's put $100 million into port security and analysis, and let's just cripple them by cutting off the chemicals. And it can be done. If you took 50% of the counter-narcotic budget going into Mexico to support them and put it towards data analysis, and we have the brain power to do that, believe me.
Right.
Data analysis, some very smart people to go through the data and find the needles in the haystack. And again, you only have to get maybe 30 to 40% before you affect the transporters and you affect the source of supply in China or India, who says the risk is too high, or they increase the price so much because now the risk is higher. We create an inflationary effect on the drug traffickers, right? You cut off supply, inflation goes up. Suddenly, a steak becomes too expensive to buy, and you buy something cheaper, or you don't buy anything at all.
Right.
You go vegan.
Right.
So that my strategy would be to use microeconomics counter strategy to make it so expensive for them to acquire the raw material that it forces them out of business.
Yeah, that is cool, because that's, like I said, that goes on to the minutia. That gets onto right down to the detail about what's their why. Why do they do what they do? And that's money. And if you can choke that out, it's going to change the tune.
You go after the critical capability.
Yeah.
Right. The central motive is money.
Mm-hmm.
You can seize a couple million here, a couple million there. They can make that back because they're printing money basically in the form of narcotics. So they can, even the drug seizure, fine, I'll make more drugs. But how hard is it to get precursor chemicals that take months to acquire through procurement, to go in a container, months to come, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be very smart in ordering chemicals so you don't run out. But suddenly there's a shortage of P2P or benzene or ether, and they're critical. And, there's 40 or 50 chemicals you need to make methamphetamine, but you only have to disrupt 3 or 4 of those chemicals to make it impossible to make methamphetamine. So you just target those particular chemicals.
Right.
Is
the same thing
with after everything.
Same thing with fentanyl?
Same thing with fentanyl. Like I forget what it's, APP or APM. I'm not quite sure. I don't have it in front of me. But yeah, there's 1 or 2 essential precursors they need to make fentanyl. Unfortunately, you only need a small amount. So, it's even harder to find those shipments because they can come in, in a FedEx Express air parcel from China straight to Sinaloa or Guadalajara. If you're sitting in Mexico and you pay 1,000 people to go online and order through this bogus company to send you, protein powder, which is really fentanyl precursor. FedEx picks that parcels up, brings them to Mexico, and distributes them. You then collect those boxes, and you have your fentanyl precursors, right?
Right.
So fentanyl is going to be a little harder to disrupt because you don't need a lot of fentanyl to make a lot of fentanyl precursors to make a lot of fentanyl.
Right.
But to make methamphetamine, you need tons and tons and tons of chemicals to make methamphetamine. Right. But still, you have to go after the precursors in some aspect. And if you got to start working with FedEx and DHL and UPS, because they're the primary carriers, China goes to Anchorage, Alaska. Anchorage, Alaska goes right to Mexico. Then you got to go to FedEx in Alaska and say, hey, we're going to check every package that's coming from China for fentanyl. And we don't care how long it's going to take. Right? And they're going to say, oh, you're costing us billions of dollars. Well, here's the choice, Ken. Are we going to save lives? Or are we going to worry about how much it costs to save lives? Right. That's what it comes down to. How much is a life worth?
Yeah. And
what are we willing to pay?
You talk to anybody and you say, it's your daughter or your child or your son, your own mother or whatever, your wife, your husband, it doesn't matter. You say that person, are they worth $1 billion? Are you willing to spend, because how many people have paid the government $1 billion in taxes over their lifetime, and say, you take that, and is it worth that? Is it worth your one family member's life? Or do we just consider everybody else, that's everybody else's problem? We're only concerned with our own little world right here. We can't be concerned with our own little, where we're at right now, and the 4 people that live in my household or whatever. Because that we don't just affect the 4 people in our household. We affect everybody in the world, whether we think so or not. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. We're like a pebble in a pond. What we do in our life ripples for a long time, even sometimes after we die, because of how we've treated somebody or taken care of somebody or helped somebody or talked to somebody or whatever the case is. And so if we're willing to, we have that money, what are we saving the money for? Or let's just put it in a savings account and keep it there forever. It doesn't work that way because we're not going to, What are we doing with that? We need to, you're right. The idea is, let's save some lives and get this stuff taken care of while we can.
You're exactly right. And we have to change our perception of each other. As you said, when it comes to my kid, I'll spend anything. But your kid, I don't really care. Your kid's black, your kid's Chinese, your kid's Mexican. I'm not concerned with what's happening in your neighborhood. But what happens in that neighborhood is going to happen in your neighborhood.
Eventually, you're right. Yep.
Right? And suddenly, the upper class neighborhoods started seeing their kids drop, and now it's become a problem.
Yeah.
Right. It's everybody's problem. By you helping my kid and I'm helping your kid, then we're going to save lives. But as long as we continue to look at this in a silo of I'm only concerned about my family, then your family's going to be vulnerable to drug addiction and this terrible fentanyl crisis that we're facing right now in our country.
Right.
And that's what it comes down to. How much is a life worth? All life is precious, but are we willing to spend what it takes to get the job done?
Right. I agree 100%. And I think we need to be willing to put ourselves out there a little bit sometimes for others.
Sure. I mean, right now, I look at Canada. People are willing to go to jail in Canada.
Yeah.
Over a principle.
Yeah.
I live out in Loudoun County. Suddenly, parents got together and said, hey, we don't want critical race theory. we don't want our kids learning about gender equality when they're in kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
And the parents in Virginia changed the election outcome because the parents got together and they said, no, we are not having our children taught this particular subject matter, and they are our kids, and we will dictate what they learn.
Right.
And they changed the paradigm.
And
so that same unity can be used to change the way we manage narcotic enforcement and harm reduction strategies in this country. If enough parents come together and say, we demand a change, and we will put people in office who will support that change.
Right. Right. And I can't agree with you more. That's exactly the way we need to be looking at it. It's not just my own little world. I remember arresting one guy one time. We were talking about something, and he was like, I don't care about that. And we're like, and I think it had something to do with, it was the war in Afghanistan while we were still in the middle of it and everything. And we're like, well, why don't you care about it? He goes, that's them. That doesn't have anything to do with me. Everything has to do with you. I mean, some stuff is not your business. Yes. Personal stuff, whatever. But when it comes to things like this that have a pervasive effect on our lifestyle or on life in general, whether it's whether it's, you take the what's the country right next to Cambodia that they recently
Laos?
No, it was, they had their big civil war, and it was just so, maybe it was Laos. I don't think it was Laos. It was,
what time frame?
Wasn't Myanmar, was it? Was it?
Well, you got Myanmar, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, and Thailand.
Yeah, maybe it was Myanmar. And anyways, it was just that horrible, the way they were just treating people, their civil wars that came up, and maybe
talking about the Rohingya situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Muslims and the Bangladeshi Muslims up on the northwest eastern border.
Yeah.
It was just where they were persecuting,
and it was just horrible. Life was cheap, and you got a whole bunch of countries all over the world where life is cheap, and they treat people, and you say, oh, that's none of my business. It is our business, and that's why I think America is over in all these other countries doing what they're doing to help provide security or fighting battles for people who can't fight for themselves, because we have the ability to do it. We're America. And we're strong enough to be able to help other people, and we should be considering that.
Yeah, I think you're right. We have to resist that urge to fall back into this concept of tribalism.
Yeah.
Right. Me and my own is all that's relevant, which is the problem. When you get overseas, you have so many ethnic groups, languages, cultures, religious aspects, right? And it's tribal groups, one tribal group against another tribal group. There's no assimilation in these cultures, right? You're either Muslim or you're Hindu or you're Buddhist or you're Christian. There's no assimilation. There's no living together in complete harmony. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
So you saw in Myanmar, you saw a problem between Bangladeshi Muslims and the Buddhist culture. They don't accept.
Right.
The Buddhists didn't accept the Rohingya, and it caused a lot of problems. In the United States, you see people trying to push us, I think, back to that concept of tribalism, especially between black and white. There are those elements, in my opinion, which are trying to separate us. When we should be coming together as one people. There are those saying, no, reparations for this group. We were persecuted. We deserve this. And then other groups are saying, hey, it wasn't me who persecuted you 100 years ago, right? My best friends are black, or they're Chinese, or they're Indian. So why am I being held accountable for what happened 200 years ago? So there's this element for trying to push people back into separate tribal groups. And then when you fall into tribal groups, then you fight each other.
Right.
Instead of creating, a universal tribe, one tribe, America. I'm an American. I don't refer to myself as an African American. I refer to myself as an American. Right? Plain and simple. That's who I am.
Right.
And when I was overseas in Asia, whatnot, people, they say, are you African? Because they don't associate black Americans with Americans. They associate black with Africa because of where they live and lack of, exposure.
Right.
And I say, no, I'm a black American. They're like, wow, black American. We ain't never heard of that concept. I said, yeah, sure. He says, but aren't you all from Africa? I said, well, we're all from someplace. Certainly my ancestors, 400 years ago were from Africa, but right now I'm an American. That's who I am first and foremost. Right. And that's how I see other Americans. I don't see black and white. I see an American. right? Same concepts, same belief systems, moving in the same direction, one tribe.
Right.
Like when I was with the Ranger Battalion, hey, black, white, yellow, doesn't matter. We were all Rangers. You were a Marine, right?
Yeah, there was
Doesn't
dark
matter
there was
what
dark
color.
green Marines, there were green Marines, there were light green Marines. Everybody was a green
Exactly.
Marine one way or another. Exactly.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
that's one thing I love about the military is that uniformity, that brotherhood. You know, the blue uniform, police officer, doesn't matter what color, we're all blue.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
And that's what I love about law enforcement. But, you try and explain that concept to people who aren't in that environment and they don't get it.
Right. Right.
Right.
And
then we get divided.
Yeah. That's you're right. Cause you sit there and you say, hey, you need to, follow your tribe, stay in your line, stay in your lane, and where you're at is where you're at. And well, what if I want to learn about you? Well, that's too bad. Then you're appropriating, and I'm not appropriating anything. I'm just trying to learn about you. You want me to know about you so I can accept you. Well, I don't want you to accept me. Well, why not? Because I want to maintain my selective group and not let anybody else in unless you think what I think and do what I think. And I don't want to. You can't think that way. You have to be open to other things, but at the same time, you can't be so. I think there's a grace in the middle. A little bit, there has to be that portion where, yes, you are who you are, but you can't negate somebody because of who they are. You don't have to tell them how to be this, that, or the other thing, but you also can't, you can't not like them, or you can't treat them differently or worse because they don't think what you think or something like that. I think we just live in such a tough time for everybody to get that, because everything is so open. Everything is so, and you mentioned before with social media and whatever, it's difficult for us not to compare ourselves and want to have to do what everybody else says we have to do. And we can't do that. We have to be true to ourselves, know who we are, but at the same time, accept other people and learn about them. And so you can help them grow and they can help you grow. I think we miss that sometimes.
Yeah, totally. And I think, as a law enforcement professional, someone who's testified in trials and built cases, I don't have an opinion. I follow the evidence,
Right.
If I'm looking at an individual, I'm investigating him, the evidence shows me he's a drug trafficker, but until a jury of 12 people say he's a drug trafficker, he's just another individual that's under investigation. And I think we have to wait for the evidence to come forth. We hear a police officer shot somebody in the inner city. Immediately, people are like, it's a case of racism. Well, let's wait for the facts to come out before we go out and we start burning things down and protesting.
Right.
And then the facts come out. The individual had a weapon. He was fighting the police, and it was justifiable. And then it's like, oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
Right?
Moving on.
Let's just sit back and wait for the information to come in. Whether it's no matter what it is, let's get all the facts before we start fighting and accusing each other and pointing fingers.
Agreed.
As an investigator, I had to learn how to maintain my personal opinions and biases and look at something as a completely objective individual.
Yeah.
And it took a long time to get to that point, but what your eyes tell you isn't always necessarily the truth.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, man, we can go down this topic forever. And I think it's fascinating. I think our conversation today is fascinating.
Absolutely.
I'm so glad you agreed to come on and stuff like that. But there's life we have to leave. We have to live. And so I'm
right.
And we've been going for a good solid 2 hours now. So it's worth a chance for us to kind of get a breath on ourselves and try to figure out what we're doing, what our next move is. So where can people find either more about you or find out about Rigaku or if they have the interest in the whole DEA world, what can they do?
They can reach out to me through my LinkedIn, Michael W. Brown, or reach out to me at Rigaku, michael.brown.rigaku. That's RIGAKU.com. Easiest way to contact me. And I'll get right back to anyone. If they want more information on Rigaku or, drug interdiction or information about DEA, a career with DEA or career in law enforcement, certainly reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to talk to anyone.
Yeah, that'd be very cool. So, just for everybody else out there, you guys know how I do this, and that our biggest thing that we do in this in this world is serving others. And I think that's what God put us on this planet for. And that's what we're supposed to do. And so serving others, being of a service to our fellow man, helping each other out, that's the biggest thing. And you're not going to find a bigger set of people that do that than teachers who do it for our kids and nurses who do it when we're sick. Those ones that are right on the front line, right in the ERs, you're walking in, who are the ones that are going to be helping you out and with you all night long if you're in there? Those are those RNs. And we can't thank you guys enough. Real heroes like them. We have our EMTs who are out there making sure that everything that goes on with us is going to be okay. We live in a country that they're there. We fall down, somebody finds us on the side of the road for whatever reason, there's going to be an ambulance there, and it's going to be filled with EMTs willing to help you out. Same thing with our firefighters who are always on the front line. Thank you guys. And of course, to our police officers, without you guys, we wouldn't have the country we have. And that goes for everything from your local municipality to your county, to your state, and then to our federal agents, federal officers, DEA agents like Mike Brown here, who just made it their life's mission to do things for other people and serve his fellow man, which is, it's just not something you see every day in people. And it takes a certain type of person to do that, to spend 30 plus years of your life doing that. So I can't say thank you enough to Michael. I can't say thank you enough to everybody else who does that every single day, goes out there and is willing to help other people stay alive and safe. So, and of course, I want to thank our military veterans, you guys on the front lines every day doing something to make sure we are safe and we have the country we have. So thank you so much. So Michael, do you have any final, I guess, takeaway you'd like to let everybody be aware of?
Okay, I would just like to echo, what you said first, thanking you as well. I know you're still on the job as a police officer. Thank you for your service. I want you to go out there and be safe with your brothers and sisters. Very well. But I hope people just take away that, there are answers, there are solutions to the problems we face, whether we're especially related to drugs, drug addiction, drug distribution, drug production. I think the question, again, it comes down to, what is it worth? What is a human life worth? What is a human life worth? And what are we willing to sacrifice to change the dynamic and the direction that we're going concerning narcotics, particularly, fentanyl-related unintentional overdoses, and how we manage that situation? We cannot move down the rabbit hole so much that we now then legalize drug usage to improve drug addiction. That's only going to further the problem.
Right.
We have to get back to the basics. We have to start looking at the foreign connectivity between precursor supply chains, drug production, and working with our foreign counterparts, where drugs are produced, to reduce and degrade that capability. And until we do that, we are not going to see a downward shift in drug addiction in this country. So we have to start taking it seriously. Every day I turn the TV on, someone has died, unfortunately, from fentanyl or heroin or some other drug. Or when we didn't even talk about people getting shot, right? The level of drug violence in the inner city. Chicago, Detroit, New York, Baltimore, all seeing increased homicides related to gang activity and drug trafficking. And that's not even mentioning the individuals who were shot and survived. Yeah. We're talking about the individuals who were shot and were deceased.
Right.
So these numbers are also increasing, and that's another epidemic that we're not addressing. That's directly linked to the drug epidemic. So if you count the number of people dying from drug overdoses, the number of people dying from drug-related, gang-related activities, you're well over 200,000.
Yeah.
And that's disproportionately affecting communities of color. So if you want true equality, then we have to sit down and we have to work out a solution to this problem. It's a very complex problem. And that's not going to happen until we can all sit down and look at each other as Americans, as one group, one tribe, interested in the common benefit of each other, the mutual benefit of each other.
Right.
And then we'll start to see progress. But it's going to take brave people to stand up and go against the grain and say, this is not the way we should do it. We should look at doing it a different way. Somebody's going to have to take the risk to stand up and take the lead to get us out of the direction we're going in.
Right.
And that would be my departing words. But hey, I appreciate the chance to get some information out there to people. and talk about what I think is probably one of the most important issues that our country is facing today.
I would agree with that 100%. You're absolutely right. So, Michael, I like I said before, I can't thank you enough for coming on. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation, and we could go, like I said, for hours. But like I said, I think we have other stuff we've got to get going. So just know that you would have an open invitation to come back on anytime if you so choose. So
great.
But so everybody out there, thank you for listening. This has been a very, very educational episode, and I like I said, I can't thank you enough. So for Michael Brown, I've been Ken Fraunfelder, and this has been the What's a Hero podcast. We're clear.